So good evening, everyone. I'm going to call to order the meeting on Wednesday, June 20th, 2018 of the Reno City Planning Commission, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If I can get Commissioner Hawkins to lead us tonight, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Michelle, can I have roll call, please?
Britton Griffith is absent. Ed Hawkins?
Here.
Paul Levis?
Here.
John Marshall?
Here.
Kevin Weisky?
Here.
Peter Gower is absent. Mark Johnson?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda is public comment. This item is for either public comment on any action item or for any general public comment. Just as a heads up, if you want to make a comment on this item or any of the agenda items, please see Michelle and fill out one of these cards. I do have some requests to speak under this item, and they keep coming in. So we will start with Tammy Holtstill.
Good evening, Tammy Holtstill, Lemon Valley Swan Lake Recovery Committee. The water's still there. I'm still here for the record. I'd like to start off with last night, this resident posted out on Facebook for American Flats this that there was some work being done, which I know was speaking with Mr. Flansburgh. They were going to start finally doing the testing. I was really excited about this, due to the fact that this is one of, when we talked about the proper science being done, this is the type of company that would do that kind of science. Hang on a second. I talked at Tumwa this morning, and of course, when I asked who were the ones that got these people out, of course, I got a blank look, so I guess I'm gonna have to do an email. But it was nice to see that this is what's happening out there. Now, my concern is making sure that with this proper science, that the proper actions are taken. So now it's going to be, okay, now you're told what can and can't be done, so what are you doing? This is something that needs to be done before more development is done, so that there's not, it goes back to that two circles I talked about. You have aquifer injection here, you have development over here. Aquifer injection, of course, we know, made it so that the ground could not absorb the water. Then you have development. Well, underneath development, you have stormwater runoff and you have affluent water. Well, when development keeps getting bigger, those two keep getting bigger, and our lake stays the same size. And I found out why I was so angry last Thursday after listening to the conversation, was the fact that I was hearing that it was okay and it was legal to flood residents. And it's not okay morally, anything else, it's not okay, and it did bother me. I didn't realize it until I went back and watched the meeting again and I was listening to it. Did I realize what the issue was and why it made me that way? Besides not following statute. It's one of those things that if staff doesn't follow statute, you guys shouldn't approve it. If you don't see the proper documentation from NDEP and Conservation and Natural Resources, Washoe County Health, Tumwa, you shouldn't be accepting it. Your own sewer plants, if you don't have that letter that says that they're going to serve, you shouldn't approve it. That's what tentative map says. So, good night.
Thank you, Tammy. The next request I have is from Denise Ross.
Hi, Denise Ross, Lemon Valley Flood Relief and Assistance. I wasn't here last week, but I was watching it, and I was appalled at the discussion that went on. I couldn't believe, for one thing, that one of the answers to your issues were to buy out the residents or to consider buying out. A lot of the residents don't want to move. They don't want to be flooded anymore. They want it stopped. because somebody gives you guys a legal piece of paper that says you're allowed to continue dumping more water into a lake that used to be a dry lake when the majority of the people bought their property there, it's wrong. It's morally wrong. And we call on all of you to make those moral decisions for us, not just the legal decisions. We're flooded out there. We are still flooded out there. It cannot take any more water. How you guys can approve any development going on while it's not been addressed, not been fixed, it's beyond me. It'd be like if I was your next door neighbor and I went to water my backyard and I flooded your yard every time. How would any of you people feel? Just because I have the legal right to water my backyard, if it floods your backyard, it doesn't make you very happy. But I do have the legal right to water my backyard. And those are the kinds of decisions that we count on all of you to make and to support the people of Lemon Valley. All of your decisions, I thought, on one of your previous meetings, I thought that you all kind of finally got the idea about what was going on out there. And then somewhere out of the blue, at your last meeting, it became acceptable that you were going to pump more water in there and allow more building to go on. You guys need to go out and take another drive around there because it's not gone away. And the people's lives are still ruined. People are still in despair. People are living with a 2-3-story HESCO barrier in front of their house. It stinks when you go there. It's filthy. You wouldn't want to live there. How can you expect residents, not just the residents that you represent in your district, but human beings? And all of you, I'm calling on all of you, go out there and see how people are living before you make any more of these decisions that allow any more developments to go on of any kind, because it all ends up in Swan Lake, and you know it. You all know it. Y'all know where it's coming from, and there's no more room. Thank you.
Thank you. Russ Earl.
Good evening, Russ Earl, representing the Silver Knolls Community Organization. Just a couple observations about a issue that's further on your schedule this evening, 6.5, which is the Red Rock Mini Mega Store, depending on what you want to look at on there. A couple concerns that we have, of course, is flooding. As in Swan Lake, Silver Lake is already at maximum capacity. And just in a few of my rough calculations, and I even underestimated 11.3 acres, and if we get a thunderstorm with 3/4 of an inch, which we have had many times and sometimes even twice that in July and August, I calculated 250,000 gallons because they have about 430,000 square feet in that property, actually a little bit more. And if they cap approximately 3/4 of that, they're going to put 200,000 square feet of buildings, and then the rest of it be asphalt between the buildings. That's a heck of a lot of water to be in a catch basin there. They say they're going to do 110%, but we've seen in Silver Knolls what stormwater does and when it gets off property. Another question is, why are we building more mini storages there? We've already got 5 between Golden Valley and Lemon, and we've got 2 more between Stead and Red Rock. We're becoming the industrial capital of storage units and stand-up warehouses. This isn't going to bring a lot of jobs to Reno. It's not going to create a lot of tax money for Reno. I would anticipate maybe 2 or 3 jobs total on 11 or 12 acre property. There would be better uses that we could use. There would be better places if they still want to build this. There was a proposal one of our other residents made, move it where it's less visible over behind the Shell station towards 395, or put it over in the industrial area, actually in off of Moya and over towards the airport. There's plenty of properties I see over there that are still for sale and have been for quite some time. Would have less, it's still going to cap a lot of area. It's still going to cause some drainage issues. But those are just my observations. I would hope you take some of this into consideration. I know they've done their job with their planning, but traffic is also something else. RTC just spent a ton of money redoing that Moya Red Rock intersection, And to build this is going to cost RTC a ton of money again to restripe, widen, and add lanes and change the traffic signals that were just literally put in 4 months ago. So please take that into consideration. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Welling.
Good evening, I'm Michael Welling. I live in the Red Rock neighborhood that Mr. Earl had just alluded to. I'm here on the LDC 1800073, the Red Rock Mega Storage. I'm not opposed or for the project. I know there's probably a need based on the percentage of storage after I made some phone calls and found out the percentages that they have for occupancy. Unfortunately, where they want to build this property is on a blind corner for the tail end of the property, and they say they want to open it up at the Moya Red Rock intersection there. Unfortunately, as Mr. Earl said, they've just spent a lot of money there. What I'd propose to them and to you, if it could possibly happen, is to consider not having this project where it's at, and maybe the developer and the owner could abandon their idea and maybe consider one of the other two parcels that are currently for sale to move into there. If they moved into the one that's adjacent to the Shell station there, they'd pick up 2 more acres, and if it went well for them, they could potentially have the opportunity to build off the back of that and end up on a side street that already has a road there that only has a fitness, 24-hour fitness type facility there, so that it wouldn't impact the traffic on Red Rock Road. There could actually be a way that Red Rock Road maintains its integrity. RTC doesn't spend the money to go ahead and move forward on this. I know that Red Rock Road at some point is going to get widened and things are going to happen there. There's an interface there where they want to build, and near there, that where they're at, there's property next to it, and then it goes right into residential. I just think it's a bad fit as we go on this evening. The other thing is water issue as usual, but I'm going to move off of this and go to, as we talk about the development in the North Valleys, as you go from Golden Valley to Stead, there's 3 housing developments that are taking place there that we don't have any sewage for. We're building a water tower up off of North Virginia, and on the side where Amazon is, we have 3 tilt-up or warehouse facilities going in right now. We have 6 large projects going in right now, and we don't have any water. We have no place for the effluent to go. It's not that we don't have the water, we don't have the effluent. You know, as we discussed previously, it's 2021 before they can even discuss and do their studies to figure out. I know the mini storage isn't going to impact us with a whole lot of traffic and different things, but I'm just suggesting to impact the neighborhood and impact the traffic that we move away from it and ask the developer to maybe consider moving off of this piece of property and maybe onto a different property if it doesn't impact them too badly. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the last request to speak form I have. Is there anyone else here who would like to make a comment? Okay.
Good evening. For the record, Bill Thomas, Assistant City Manager. I wanted to come tonight to the Planning Commission to advise you of some changes that have happened or are happening in the structure of the city that I thought might be of importance to the Planning Commission. The city manager, who's now been here, I think formally a year in May, is very interested in making sure that the organization's structured to provide the community the kinds of service and responsiveness that it warrants for the different things we do. To that end, she has directed that we reorganize the Community Development Department, and we are going to now be having 2 departments from what was originally the Community Development Department. There will be a new Neighborhood Services Department that'll be created, and that department will focus on essentially what comes in through the Reno Direct citizen complaint comment process. In other words, that's the number we use for people in the community to call us and tell us there's some issue we need to address. So that particular function will then drive code enforcement, parking enforcement, and our community assistance program, which we call HAND, which is the housing program, and those will all be under what's called the Neighborhood Services Department. The Development Services Department, which will be the new department, will be made up of planning, new development engineering, building and inspections, and then lastly, business license. So those four, which were formerly part of the Community Development Department, will stay as the department that primarily serves the Planning Commission. So you shouldn't be seeing anything visibly in terms of your response and your interactions with the city, but we did want to make sure that the commission was aware of this change and didn't read about it in the paper and find out and have questions. So that's my purpose for coming this evening. Lastly, organizationally, Eric Jensen, who is the Community Development Director, on July 1 will be shifting responsibilities over to a different position, which is he will be in charge of revitalization, which is our economic development and downtown revitalization function, very much in line with interests and his experience. So that'll be a change that you will see that will result in some difference. We will be recruiting for 2 new directors, one for development services and one for neighborhood services. You may or may not see my smiling face here, as I will be filling in the gap between today and when we have a new development services director. So I'll be working directly with Claudia and Janelle and the other members of the development services department until we get a new director. My guess is, and I may be going out on a limb, in the past when we've done those kind of recruitments, we've included members of the Planning Commission or a member to participate in the recruitment process to make sure that you got a chance to weigh in on the candidates that came through. So I'm going to guess that that'll happen again. So you'll be very much aware of the progress of the selection of the director for the Development Services Department. So I just wanted to make sure again that you're all aware of that. If you have any questions, to the extent I can answer them, I will do that.
Commissioners, any questions? Should we make him fill out a card since he's here in public comment?
I was gonna, but I didn't know what item I should put it on.
I think we'll put you under public comment, just because we make all these other fine people do it.
I thought you were gonna make me come on the back end public comment, right?
Actually, no. At first, when you said you had some news for us, I was wondering how many of us you were going to kick off the commission. So the news that you provided was perhaps less, dramatic than that. So thank you, Bill. Appreciate the update.
Thank you.
So, oh, sorry, Commissioner Hawkins.
I know we've talked about it several times in the last few months, but here it goes, since you're one of the big wigs here. When do we get to start seeing abandonments and everything we're not seeing right now, to include bringing new property into the city of Reno?
So I hope you're aware that we have embarked on a very extensive and probably a 1.5 year process to update the development code. Part of the conversation in development code is going to include the processes we use: annexations, special use permits, zone changes, all those components of our planning process. Some of them do require by law planning commission involvement, some of them don't. Ultimately, we will be presenting to you the code as it moves forward. Probably there'll be a couple touch points like there was in the master plan where you get to weigh in on your thoughts and comments. And then ultimately the actual approval of development code will come before you. So before anything's adopted or changed, you'll get a bite of the apple to be able to see how the code's going to be proposed to the council ultimately for adoption. And in that context, Commissioner Hawkins, that's where that conversation will happen. My guess is you probably won't be seeing that until the latter parts of the development code update, because we're going to start with the actual zones, which are the most direct spinoff of the new master plan, and then we'll probably go into the standards and the processes. In other words, we want to know what we're trying to do before we decide how we're going to do it. But that would be the context in which we'll have that conversation about what you feel should be coming to you, what are the parts that you think are necessary for you making good decisions, and ultimately, of course, the council will probably make a decision on how they want to use those processes, but it's going to be very much a part of the conversation.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. And don't forget to fill out that pink card. Any additional public comment this evening on this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment, bring it back to the commission for item 4, which is approval of the minutes from the Planning Commission meeting on May 16th. Looking for comments, a motion, any of the above.
Commissioner Olivas, I move to approve.
Second?
Motion is second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
No abstentions?
One abstention.
Okay, so I have approval with one abstention for Commissioner Marshall. Okay, moving on to item 5, City Council Liaison Reports.
I have no comments from Councilwoman Burkus.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move on to item number 6, which is public hearings. In case anyone here is not aware, both item 6.1, the Pachetti Ranch, and item 6.2, the Tanamera RPC Business Park, have been pulled from our agenda this evening. So we will be getting a notice on those, re-noticed and rescheduled on our agenda. So we are going to move on to item 6.3, which is case number LDC 18-00086, Grace Church Condition Amendment. Start with a presentation from the applicant's representative.
Good evening, members of the commission. For the record, my name is Ellie Reeder. I'm with Loomis & Associates, and I'm here today representing the applicant. The request before you tonight is an amendment to the Grace Community Church Special Use Permit to modify square footage of the proposed Children's Center from 5,481 square feet to 9,413 square feet. So to refresh you all and give you some background on the project, the Reno Planning Commission approved this project in August of 2017, which included an addition of a children's center, adding seats to the worship center, and a parking lot expansion to the north end of the site. To date, both the seating increase and the parking lot expansion have been completed. We're before you now as it was discovered that the square footage listed in the original application for that proposed children's center was incorrect in that it included just the footprint of the building. So despite this, it's important to note that the building has always been planned at 9,413 square feet, and all considerations and calculations associated with the building were figured according to that in the original application. So nothing is changing about our project request except to correct the square footage to reflect the entire planned building. You may recall the site is located in Northwest Reno on Robb Drive, south of Simmons Drive, north of Bankside Way. Property is adjacent to Canyon Creek Park to the west and Sarah Winnemucca Elementary School to the east, and single-family housing to the northeast and southwest. The site is zoned public facility and it has been utilized as a church site for the last 22 years. The planned location for the Children's Center will be east of the existing play area toward the south end of the parcel, as you see called out here. These are some images of the planned location for that Children's Center. It will be east of the existing play center, or play area, toward the south end of the parcel. And this is a rendering of the proposed building. Again, nothing about the building has changed and is the same one approved by Planning Commission last year. It's designed to look and fit with the church's existing on-site structures. The building will be 2 stories, 26 feet tall to the roof line, 30 feet tall to the top of the mechanical equipment, and 9,413 square feet overall. So with that, this concludes my presentation. Both myself and the applicant are available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ellie. We'll
Thank
let
you.
you know if we have any questions. We'll hear a presentation from staff.
Good evening, Heather Manzo, Assistant Planner for the record. As the applicant's representative outlined, we're here this evening purely from a technicality perspective. The request that's before you tonight is consistent with the approved special use permit, and it's truly a matter of the second floor of that approved building square footage being included in the special use permit request. So staff is recommending approval. As the applicant's representative noted, that all of the permits that are associated with this work, aside from the second story square footage, have been submitted and are issued. And the second story is pending your decision here this evening. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Heather. So this is a public item, so we will open public comment, but first I will bring it back to the commission for any disclosures, starting with Commissioner Olivas.
Commissioner Olivas, I spoke with the applicant's representative and I'm familiar with the site from the prior application.
No more disclosures for Commissioner Marshall.
Commissioner Johnson, familiar with the site from the previous project?
Commissioner Griffith, no disclosures.
Commissioner Hawkins talked with the applicant's representative, went past the site. Thank you.
Commissioner Weisky, I received an email from the applicant's representative, and I'm familiar with the site based upon the previous application.
Okay, thank you. Michelle, do we have any requests to speak on this item?
No, we do not.
Is there anyone in the audience that would wish to make a public comment on this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to the commission for questions, comments, motion, any of the above. Commissioner Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for fire, please. Since you're here, we're going to use you. Talk to me about the second story sprinkler system, please, on this specific site.
So having not reviewed the plans, let me back up. Dave Cochran, Reno Fire Chief, and just being caught in your web, if I may. We will, if sprinkles are required, that'll be mandated at the plan review stage. If there is a true fire separation between the second story and any assembly occupancy, they possibly won't be required. But until we see those plans and actually view what they plan to build, or exactly what they plan to build, we're not going to commit that sprinkles are or are not required.
Yeah, the reason why I ask this is because that's going to have children upstairs, and that's my ultimate concern, is making those kids safe.
Exactly. And if there, for instance, was sleeping quarters, something like that up there, that would trigger the requirement, and the fact there will be children up there will be something that will be considered at the plan review stage. So,
thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Weisky.
If you're ready for a motion, Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to go.
I think Commissioner Marshall has a comment first,
Okay.
or a question. Commissioner Marshall.
Heather? The staff report says that we need to, we're looking to, or there's an inconsistency with a recommended condition of approval number 1. But I look at condition approval number 1, I'm not certain what do we do to
So Heather
correct
Manzo,
that? It just
Assistant Planner.
says comply with all codes.
So what condition number 1 is that the request that comes through for building permit is consistent with the approval. The previous notice for public hearing included that 5,000 square foot children's building. Because the building size square footage, including both stories, is over 9,000 square feet, the notice that was provided to the public was inaccurate. And so it's not consistent with the Planning Commission's approval of this special use permit. So we're here before you this evening to correct the difference in square footage.
I mean, it's not, this is here nor there, but it seems like what's really inconsistent is what we approved was a 5,000 square foot children's center, not a 9,000 square foot children's center. So it's not a noticing issue, it's a issue that is inconsistent with our prior approval. But
In this case, it is actually that the square footage was incorrectly stated in the application that ultimately came before you for a public hearing. The building dimensions are exactly the same as they were when the special use permit was approved. It's
Yes.
just that the square footage of the second story was
understand.
excluded from the square footage.
Okay, where I think the circulation element on page 7 of the old staff report, from what I can tell, but I would love to get your confirmation, that the doubling of the square footage of the building does not in any way affect the traffic circulation, other elements that we considered when we first approved this at 5,000 square feet.
That's correct. Nothing about the exterior improvements have been modified at all to accommodate this request. So the design that was approved, it contemplated the 9,000 square foot building.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you. Additional questions? Commissioner Weisky?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the case of LDC 18-00086, Grace Church Condition Amendment, based upon compliance with the applicable findings, I move to approve the amendment of a condition of approval for a special use permit, LDC 17-00066, Grace Church, 1220 Robb Drive, as written in this staff report.
Thank you. A motion, do I have a second?
Commissioner Griffith, I'll second.
Motion is second. Any additional discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, we will move on to our next item, which is item 6.4, case number LDC 18-00090, Gilbert Humphrey House relocation. And we'll start with a presentation from the applicant.
Good evening, Mike McGonigal, for the applicants, pardon me, Tim and Nancy Gilbert of the Gilbert Family Trust. The Humphrey Gilbert House is one of the endangered historic homes in the UNR Gateway District and was actually owned by my client's great niece, or I'm sorry, great aunt. They have purchased a lot in Arlington and St. Lawrence and plan to relocate the house. Even though it's an oversized lot, this house has massive eaves. So we are asking for a variance to encroach into the secondary front yard along St. Lawrence, which the 3 other houses on that corner also do. We're actually going to be kind of completing the streetscape. We're actually matching. The only piece that we're encroaching is that little gray piece. And with that, I thank you for helping us try to save this whimsical piece of history.
All right. Thank you. We'll stick around if we have any questions. We'll
I'm here. I promised Jeff I'd be under 2 minutes.
Jeff is a taskmaster.
I didn't force him to do that.
Okay.
Jeff Borkhardt, Associate Planner for the record. Just to give a little bit more context to this, the area. This is St. Lawrence right here. This is Arlington right here, running north-south. And here's a little bit more of a close-up here. So this is within the Newlands National Register Historic District, and as Mr. McGonigal stated, the house would be relocated from 8th Street near the off-ramp for Center Street, and the university has released an RFP. The owners of this subject site, the applicants, the Gilberts, they have put in a response to that RFP in order to obtain this house, and their request is to relocate it here. And as Mike mentioned, the request is to have a variance on the secondary front, which is along St. Lawrence here, from 15 feet, which is the required front yard setback in this zoning district, to 8 and some change, about 8.75 feet. And that is consistent with a number of the different properties in the area. So, Michelle, if you could zoom out a little bit more here. So this is the subject property right here. It's vacant currently. But if you look at a number of the different corner parcels throughout this entire neighborhood, you'll see that they all have setbacks that are less than 15 feet, that are less than what is required in the underlying zoning district. I mean, we could look at this one right here, this one right here, this one right here, this one right here, and so on and so forth if you go throughout the entire neighborhood. So this really is a unique situation here where we have a character that's already established in the neighborhood. And they're taking a historic site that's already built, and they're trying to preserve it in a neighborhood that has characteristics of the same time period architecturally, and they're trying to fit in with that context of that neighborhood. And one of the key aspects of preservation is if you can't preserve it in place, you have to relocate it. You want to relocate it either within the same context, meaning the same neighborhood in which it was originally subdivided, or have a similar harkening back to say, yes, I understand why this building is here, or you want to put it into a place where it shares similar characteristics. You don't want it sitting on its own and saying, why is this here? This makes absolutely no sense. And so this would fit into that characteristic. And so part of the findings that have to be made is that there's an extraordinary situation. So in this case, this is a corner lot. So you have two front setbacks. And if this weren't an interior lot, we wouldn't be here today. This would be perfectly fine. But because that corner lot, the setback changes from 5 feet to 15 feet here. Most of the properties in this neighborhood are less than that 15 feet. Also, this is a historic structure. And as I mentioned, you want to try to fit that context with a neighborhood that's similar in character. And so this variance it is uniquely tied to that historic nature of the building. And so if for some reason the applicant does not get awarded this house from the university, there is a condition, condition number 4, that states that this variance would be null and void because it's directly tied to the historic nature of the property. Addition to that, there has to be something peculiar about the site, and that would make it difficult to the site would it would be difficult to fit the existing character of the property due to its current size on this site, and still meet that side yard setback or the secondary front without destroying the character of the house, without having to cut off a piece of the house. So you could conceivably put it here, but you'd have to cut off a portion, which would destroy the historic integrity of the house. And so with that, staff can recommend approval of this variance, and I'm available for any kind of questions that the Planning Commission may have. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. Before we open this up for public comment, I will ask the commission for disclosure, starting with Commissioner Weisky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have visited the site.
Commissioner Hawkins, as did I.
Commissioner Griffith, I drive by the site every day.
Commissioner Johnson visited the site.
Commissioner Marshall, I live about 2.5 blocks from the site. I spoke with council, and it does not present a conflict that would disallow my participation.
Commissioner Olivas, I visited the site.
Okay. Michelle, do we have any requests to speak on this item?
No, we do not.
Is there anyone in the audience who would wish to make public comment on this? Seeing none, I will bring it back to the commission for any questions. Commissioner Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for the applicant.
Yes, sir.
I know it's really early in the ball game. Have they indicated how they will move that house and how many pieces, the route that it's going to take?
One piece. It'll be coming down, I believe, Center Street. That's really pretty much the only part of the route that I can remember at this point. But it will be coming in one piece, and it's going to be something to watch, that's for sure.
I'd like to know when that happens.
Yeah, I'll be there, and I'm sure it's going to be a Sunday morning.
I'll be there. Thank you.
Additional questions? Commissioner Weisky.
Thank you. Jeff, please, I think you're going to be best to answer this. So in order for us to approve a variance, there has to be hardship. And I still don't understand the hardship based upon an existing structure in another part of town being too large for the lot creates a hardship for this piece of property. I mean, if there's other structures that can be built and designed to match the design of the neighborhood on this piece of property, then this is an I want. I want this house from the other side of town brought over and put on this lot that it doesn't fit on. That's not a hardship. So what convinced me that this is truly a hardship?
So the exact language of finding B, 1B, says the strict application of the regulation would result in a peculiar and exceptional practical difficulty to, or exceptional, it says, or exceptional and undue hardship upon the owner of the property.
Okay, so
here-
can the owner of the property build a structure in similar appearance to the neighborhood on this piece of property without a variance?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
so the variance is because there's an existing building that's too large for the lot to be, they're asking to buy that structure and bring it in and put it on a lot that's too small for it. That's a hardship?
Yeah, so one of the key aspects is the preservation component of this. And so there's only certain limited number of properties in which a property could be relocated into and still meet the goals of historic preservation within the community. You can relocate it within the same immediate vicinity in the same tract, the Evans tract in which it was located, and maintain that context. Or you can relocate it in a district that has or an area that has similar characteristics in terms of time period, architecture, everything like that, and still maintain the historic character of the
Okay, so
property.
are there other districts in the city of Reno that this house could be moved to and fit the era of the structure?
I would say this, and then there's the Wells Avenue Conservation District. The likelihood that you have a vacant parcel that has adequate size to fit this structure and still meet the same character that's already established within the existing neighborhood is very limited. And so that's why there is a unique characteristic in terms of this property that this reduction in terms of the setback would match almost every single secondary front in the entire neighborhood.
Okay.
You may not have
So let
that
me ask you
opportunity.
this then. All the houses that you pointed out in the neighborhood that have less setback, were they built to the standards at that time, and that's why they're closer to the property line than what this is?
So it may not have even had standards at that time. A lot of those houses were constructed
But now we do.
pre-planning. Correct. But as I mentioned, in a lot of portions of the city, we have what we call infill development standards. And you can get closer to the street in order to match your existing neighborhood. In this case, the infill development standards would not be applicable because you have no abutting property. The way our standards are written for infill, you have to match the abutting property. Well, there is no abutting property in this case, so you would default back to the base zoning standard, which says your front yard setback is 15. If the infill standard said you got to match the character of the existing neighborhood, then we would be going into this situation where we're saying, okay, and that's really what the intent behind that is to match the character of the neighborhood, to not change that character. And so really what they're asking for is to fit in with what's already established in the entire
But
neighborhood.
really what they're asking for is to change the setback standard for the neighborhood. And that's what you're saying. The argument is it's the wrong setback standard. Not that it's a variance, but we need to change the setback standard because it's not consistent with the rest of the neighborhood.
Well, what we're saying is this is a unique situation. If we change the setback standard for MF14, then everybody would be able to get an 8.75 setback. What they're asking for is to match what everyone else in this entire neighborhood has in order to save a historic structure, which is one of the master plan goals.
But so for just the reason why we have the special condition number 1, I think it is, that shows that it's okay only for a certain type of structure, old, but not for a new design that could be just as architecturally compatible with the neighborhood.
That is
so-
correct. So this is not, but a new structure would not be necessarily potentially significant. This property already had a survey on it. It's listed
Right,
as
no
potentially
one's arguing
significant.
that the structure is not architecturally and historically significant in and of itself. The question is whether this particular lot, which already has a house on it and which already can put at least 2 other structures on it that would fit within the setbacks, there's a particular hardship to that lot because they can't put an oversized structure on it. That's, in my mind, I mean, the fact that it's historic is, first of all, let me say I'm very in favor of trying to fit that house on the lot. But the question is the variance the vehicle to do it, or because really what you're saying is legislatively, it's not appropriate to have that kind of setback in this particular location because everyone else has 8.5 feet or whatever it is. So I'm kind of with Commissioner Weisky here is that I'm having difficulty making the connection between the fact that it's something that we want to do versus the very kind of, narrowly defined requirements for a variance. Because if we allow this, and what I'm particularly worried about is how is this, because I can't do what I want to do on my lot versus it then becomes the hardship, as opposed to I can't do a reasonable activity on my lot. So that's where I have a problem using the variance in this situation.
I'm going to jump in here really quick. Claudia Hansen, Planning Manager. I agree with everything that Jeff has presented so far. And as far as potentially the regulation or the existing setbacks being incorrect for this area, they may be. Newlands is newly listed on the National Register. This is an area of town that we'll be looking at in more detail with the code update. The master plan has called this area aside that we do need to look at it in more detail. We'll be bringing in some consultant help on historic preservation and how we should be approaching setbacks in this area. As Jeff said, also, there are a very limited number of lots that would be appropriate for historic structures such as this. The size, I think we would hit a variance request in most areas because the lot size in these historic areas is quite a bit smaller than you would see on a standard lot today. And so I guess I'm saying that as we move forward with the code update, we are definitely going to be revisiting the setback requirements in this area, and that you may be correct. It might just be the wrong regulation for this area. But that would take time to review the appropriate setbacks for these zoning districts and for this historic neighborhood and what's appropriate in this area. This neighborhood in general is a unique situation. It was approved through Shippo's review that the architectural character has been maintained in this area. And so I would say the overall architectural character, the overall setbacks in this area specifically are appropriate and have been maintained for the last over 100 years. And so moving a building from a similar time period into this area, we are looking at maintaining those existing setbacks. And so I would say it is an unusual situation to bring in a historic structure. I don't think we've ever, as long as I've been here, I don't think we've done this. But to bring it in and to maintain those setbacks, to maintain the character of the surrounding area. I understand that you could bring in a modern house into this area under your argument. I don't know if we would support that because that also would not maintain the historic character of the neighborhood. But something that we definitely need to look through in Title 18 and how we are going to approach infill projects, potential relocation of structures within established historic neighborhoods, in particular Newlands. That helps at all.
Commissioner Weisky, I'll throw it back to you since you
Thank you.
started this discussion.
So then, a finding is a historical structure. Whether or not an architect can design a property to, in appearance, match the architecture of the surrounding homes with new modern techniques, that would not apply. It's only because this is a historical and that's an exclusion, that's a hardship.
Yes, because one of the aspects of a historical property is you don't want to destroy the integrity.
The property's not historical, we're talking about the structure
Well,
being
sure.
put on it.
Sorry, yes, the structure. You don't want to destroy the integrity of the structure. And by having to meet the 15-foot setback, they would have to, the eaves are very distinct on this structure.
So this is all about saving the structure. This is not about setbacks, and this is not about anything else. It's about saving a structure.
No, that's one aspect of it. The setbacks are key in order to fit this structure onto this property. And so in order to, if you didn't have that, the structure would have to be cut back to 15 feet. You would destroy the integrity of the structure, and then it would defeat the purpose
Not
of
necessarily.
relocating it to this property.
You mean to fit on that piece of property, but not on another piece of property?
Correct, but as the planning
So
manager
somebody bought a
stated-
piece of property, then they made an application to buy a house that doesn't meet the setback requirements for the property, which is kind of backwards, but that's creating a variance and a hardship.
So
I'm thinking about this in the broader picture, Jeff, and that is, there's other people out there who, with variances of similar setback requirements or not the same situation, as Claudia mentioned, this is not something that we've, seen, and I agree. I mean, Claudia's in this room as a planner has been here a lot longer than all of us, so she would know, but there are a lot of other variances that have been turned down because there's not a true hardship. And that's what I'm getting at. Like Commissioner Marshall was stating, well, this is an I want, and my I wants can lead to a variance. That's a hardship. And I see that in this place because of the way the dominoes have been put in place.
So, and as the planning manager mentioned, there are very limited properties where this would actually be appropriate to be relocated to and still try to maintain the historical integrity of that property.
And there's another one down on South Arlington, just south of Mount Rose Street. Whether it's available or not, it's not the discussion tonight.
And I would say that I do not believe that is within the same Newlands district. So that's one of the key characteristics. I mean, they're relocating this into a district that fits the same time period that this is in, which is appropriate for historic preservation. With the other 11 structures, they're also looking at trying to relocate it within an area within the same context, which has come before the council recently. So what's happening is these are an imminent need to move. The university has released this RFP, and if they don't get moved, something's going to happen to them. And so this is one of those.
Point. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is one of those structures that needs to move within the next year.
Commissioner Levis.
Yeah, Jeff, so with Commissioner Weisky here, the only justification I'm hearing is on the structure. And I guess if you haven't addressed why the property is characterized by an exceptional circumstance. It's all about the structure. And when I look at this and I compare it to the variance that came before us, the McDonald's on Mount Rose Highway, what's the difference? You're talking about the construction methods are driving the variance, not the property. Out there, we thought that also was a very good opportunity, and the sign was actually better than the sign was before, but the property didn't have an exceptional circumstance. So by saying that the structure can drive the variance, we should have passed that too. Why didn't we pass that one? And that was unanimous. This one, you're characterizing it by the structure and the construction means and methods. And if we completely ignore that and look at our findings, I don't see how the property is characterized by the exceptional circumstance.
I'm going to jump in one more time. So maybe not, maybe more than one. But on the, I would say the Newlands neighborhood, so this didn't really come before the Planning Commission much, if at all. I think maybe with an update. So the city of Reno worked with Shippo for 3 years to establish the Newlands neighborhood as a historic district. Within that process, we worked with Shippo and the HRC, Historical Resources Commission, to do extensive analysis of the history of how the Newlands neighborhood came to be. So each subdivision within Newlands was created under a certain time period. And this was all documented through, like I said, 3 years of research and many, many hours of the HRC and with Shippo and the consultants that we hired to work on this. So each area is designated or was established under a certain decade, we'll say. So there was the original subdivision of Newlands that put it into larger lots. And then each area was subdivided, each has a certain tract name. Then they came in during different decades through the 1900s. And so with those, this area, this specific tract that came in is consistent with the Evans subdivision. So, and I don't know, they were fairly small tracts. They were a few blocks today. And so there's very few areas that match the time of the subdivision with the time of the construction of the house. So even though Newlands is a larger area, each sub-area of Newlands is specified from the decade that it was built in the 1900s. So some were in the 1920s, then maybe the other ones didn't come until the 1950s. And we actually had, Shippo saw that this was a unique characteristic towards the later phases, and they actually extended the time period of the Newlands neighborhood because there was such a significance in the time period that these came in. So there was some that came in, they extended it to 1960, I think was the ultimate year cutoff. But each sub-area of Newlands is, as I said, categorized as those are the decades when that specific area was created and was subdivided. That area, the one where this is, matches the one for the Evans subdivision. And so finding something consistent like that in the city is nearly impossible. So I would say this parcel definitely has a unique characteristic because it was created through the subdivision at the time, which was a large portion of the study that came out to designate the Newlands neighborhood on the National Register.
So with all that, and I can appreciate that, you're saying that this is the only house that could ever go on that property based upon that history?
I'm saying that this area has a unique situation and that this subdivision was categorized, and I'm sorry, I don't know the decade that this one went in, but this subdivision is unique because it was created during this specific decade, similar to when the house was built. So it's a match. So I would say the house is a unique situation, and this specific sub-area of Newlands is also a specific and unique situation, if that gives you more background.
I appreciate the history, but you're not convincing me that this is the only house that can go on this property and that's exceptional to the property. I'm sorry. It's we're trying to. It's great and it's altruistic, and I think it makes sense. But I don't think the variance is the vehicle. And if the justification that it takes time to change the things was the case, then we should have approved the sign on Mount Rose Highway too.
Mr. Marshall.
Hey, Jeff, could you put up the map that you were using and move it down?
The larger one?
Yeah. I mean, the map that we have is, yeah. Can you point out, move down south on Gordon? Where's the subject house right now? The lot?
It's this one right here, where my pen is, sort of blocking it. There we go.
Yeah. No, I got it. Could you move your pen for a minute?
Yeah.
Huh. I seem to recall there's a vacant lot just about 2 or 3 blocks down Gordon. That, there are empty double lots, vacant lots. It's not that this isn't the only place. I'm struggling. I want the house saved. We all want the ends. The question is, do the ends justify the use of this means, which is the variance? And, you know, I agree with Commissioner Levis that it presents as much as I can respect the amount of historical work that went into the neighborhood, there's no particular hardship or particular circumstances of this lot that would justify a variance. It justifies changing the rules. It doesn't justify the variance for this particular lot. If we want to do that, that's where I keep coming back to, is not being able to find, the guy can build a number of different, under the MF14, at least 3 units on this lot. And he can build a new house that looks exactly like the one he wants to save. So that it's not a hardship that's focused on the lot. It's a hardship because we can't save this house that we want to save in this particular location. That is architecturally and historically appropriate. But I don't see that as justifying, and quite honestly, it'll give us huge heartache in the future to distinguish other variances when people come in and say, hey, you did it for a good reason. You wanted the ends, but I'm not certain I can find, the variance, the situation. The other one I'm comparing it to, maybe you can help us out, sorry for a rambling long question.
Just waiting for the question.
Is, we did a variance on Brewer's Cabinet, right? And that was premised on variance for parking, right? It was premised on the character of the neighborhood it was in. Was it an SUP?
SUP.
I think there was a variance.
Yeah.
But the parking was non-conforming. It wasn't legally established, and they were coming through and trying to do safety improvements
What did
on the
we?
parcel.
What was the What did we vary from?
The number of parking spaces.
The number of parking spaces, and that was premised. I had difficulty with that, but you gave us a basis on which to make that I ultimately found adequate, which was and it did have to do with the circumstances of, because it was one of the few, what was it? It was one of the few commercial lots in that neighborhood.
So you were weighing 2 different items in that case, whether or not it was appropriate for pedestrian safety improvements and adequate circulation, or if parking was more important. And those were the 2 aspects that were sort of playing into that. And it's very similar in this case. We're looking at historic preservation. That creates in and of itself a unique circumstance. It's highlighted a lot throughout our entire master plan in numerous different policies. And it is a large goal of the city to try and preserve things. You do not have circumstances where people are picking up houses and moving them very often. And so that does create a unique situation. This lot in and of itself is unique because you have to try to find a time frame to fit a structure on there in order.
Why does it have to be?
Historic preservation. If you're looking at trying to maintain the integrity of a structure, you have an order of preference. One is to maintain it in place. Well, obviously the university has said that they're not going to maintain these structures in place, which is why they've released the RFP. The other one is to try to move it within a similar context. So within the Evans Tract. Well, the Evans Tract is already very limited in that area. The university has already said they're going to expand south towards the freeway. And there's already another plan to move the other 11 structures to Evans Park. And that's being worked through right now with the city council, legal staff, and they've put in a proposal to the university. that doesn't create any other space for this structure to go. And two, find another location that fits within the same time frame. So you have a third option. And so if you find a neighborhood that's in the same time frame, great, wonderful. So this was within the 1930s. This specific subdivision was within the 1930s. And so they found this location. What's causing the issue is the secondary front setback. Whereas any other lot that would be similarly situated that didn't have an alley right there, they wouldn't have this issue.
So
That's,
So to use that same argument, when a developer in Domani Ranch or South Meadows comes forward and all their homes are built under the same era and they no longer want a corner lot to use the same setbacks as everybody else, that's going to be their request for a variance, because we're going to use it in the same way, because it's no longer the property, it's the structure. And that's the precedence that could be set with this variance, looking at property, not looking at property, but looking at structure.
If somehow those structures in Domani Ranch acquire historical significance under the National Register criteria.
Got it. Okay, I see where I was wrong, Jeff.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
I
you
guess
for pointing
to
that out.
And you said something, that when those structures get historic recognition. So, and you've done a great job of explaining why the structure is historical and why the structure has a hardship. I still don't see why the property has a hardship.
So the property in and of itself fits in with the historic district. So you're trying to locate a historic property into a historic district. You don't want to put this historic property on some random lot that would just be able to fit it just to fit it, because that wouldn't fit with the nature of historic preservation. What we're trying to do here is follow the guidelines of historic preservation. And so that's the key characteristic that's distinguishing this from every other situation, where you can't just pick up a house that Toll Brothers built and put it on this property. That doesn't have the same level of significance. And part of that significance is the structure, sure. But the property in and of itself fits within that Newlands historic district. So the property is significant already by virtue of being within the historic district. So you're matching them up. You're putting square peg with square peg. The problem is you have a...
Yeah. It's
Yes, there you go, square hole. I like that phrase.
Commissioner Griffith.
Commissioner Griffith, Jeff, to circle back to the property itself, the property is owned by the applicant and the house is being purchased by the same applicant. So with condition number 4, the variance is only applicable if this particular house is on the lot. So if we wanted to go back to the property and talk about what the hardship is that the other properties surrounding this area that the house could go on are not owned by the applicant. So the reason that I think about it this way is the applicant that has the lot and has owned the lot is the same that is looking for the house, and the other lots, although they may be wonderful around town, are not owned and are not being asked for by the variance. So I can't look at the city and say there's only 2 other options and they're not interested in taking this house. So that's where I'm coming from, unless you know something that I don't and they happen to own 3 other lots in Newlands.
I don't know what lots they
That's where, when I circle back to the property, I look at condition number 4, and I see that the property is owned by the same group that's trying to take the house. So if they don't get the house, which would make this a peculiar situation, then it's null and void.
So if I could tag on that, Jeff, let's say I don't want an old house, but I want to move a house that impeccably built to mimic exactly the style of the Newlands neighborhood. And it is a beautiful house. It's unfortunately too wide for the lot. Is that a hardship for me to move that on there, even though it's non-historical and it matches perfectly with the neighborhood characteristics? That's not a hardship, but because the other structure is historical, that's why we have the hardship.
I think you're correct. There's a level of architectural significance
that comes into play. There's a number of different other significant aspects of a property that come into play when we're looking at what qualifies for a historic structure. If you build something to make it look like it's historic, but it doesn't meet that criteria for listing it on the National Register, it's not historic.
Jeff, I'm going to jump in here for just a second. Part of the question, just to respond to everybody else here in terms of the historic nature of this house. Correct me if I'm wrong, if this doesn't go through, this house gets demoed by the university? Is that what they've essentially said?
You know, I can't say.
So let me bring the applicant up for
university
just a
says.
second.
Yeah.
Could I have the applicant come up for just a
Is that
moment?
relevant to our conversation here today?
It is in terms of the question that I'm asking.
Okay.
So as I understand it, there was an RFQ out for this house to be relocated. You submitted on that RFQ.
Correct.
To relocate this house. In response to that RFQ, what was the information provided to you by the university with respect to this particular house as being owned by the family?
The family will get preferential treatment under the RFP because there's the family connection to it. And the fact that we are relocating it within the historic area of Reno. When the RFP is accepted by the university's timeframe, we have 70 days. And then it becomes kindling.
And do we know when the university is making their determination on that RFP?
No. It was due, I believe, June 6th, and they've acknowledged that they have them. I believe the Evans Park is sort of causing a bit of delay in the review of the other submitters to the RFP.
And then in that RFP, was there description as to, as you said, it would be kindling in 70 days? What has the university said with respect to these historic houses if they are not relocated or found to be, an acceptable proposal to relocate them?
They plan to demo them.
Okay. So, Bill, can I have you come up here for just a moment, please? Thank you. I know you want to say so. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this in some of the hardship aspect of this, that the city is basically saying that they can meet the findings on this. Is that due to the fact that we are looking at a very specific historic preservation situation, or is there something else in this that, I know we've been going in a number of different directions on setting precedent, but it seems to me that we're also dealing with a very unique situation here for something that is, I guess, in conflict with some stated goals of both the master plan and this commission.
For the record, Bill Thomas, Assistant City Manager. Very lively conversation. Glad I came tonight. I would suggest to you that in this situation, everything, including what the Vice Chair said, goes into the mix of your decision. When you develop a code, and you're going to deal with this when you see the development code, you try to anticipate every situation that might happen, and you write rules for those situations. But guaranteed, whatever rule you write, there's going to be a fact-based situation that you have to deal with, where you have to make a decision whether or not this is counter to what the purpose of the code was or consistent with the purpose of the code is. And I would argue that is the purpose of the variance. I know you guys have talked a lot about hardship, which is certainly part of it. You probably heard the staff say unique a lot, because you'll hear from the staff unique because that's the basis where we look at it to say, is there something factually about this situation that would warrant us not applying the strict rules? And that's why you hear the Newlands, which is a unique historic neighborhood, the fact that the home has to be moved, and I can tell you from my conversation with the university, they're not going to keep them. So at some point, they're likely to be demolished if somebody doesn't move it. And then the issue, like Jeff said, of what the character of the neighborhood is. So I would suggest to you, in my experience and the way these are supposed to work, is this is a release valve. The variance is a release valve for you to look at the facts of the case and decide whether that's the right tool to get to the ends. So I would suggest that the ends do justify the means in a variance case, because that's the specific tool that's given to you and to us to try to look at a particular request And really, the inquiry you're making, is there enough facts around the case that warrant not strictly applying the 15-foot setback? That's really what your conversation, in my opinion, should be. If you see enough facts that say it warrants not having a 15-foot setback, then certainly the process is there for you to say this, we should put this house on that site.
And I appreciate that. I guess where I'm going at, and where I think a lot of the fellow commissioners are at, is that we are also told and suggested as we move through these things that we have findings and we have to make the findings. So that's why the specifics and the hair splitting that's going on with respect to the terminology is because we have to make these. So I appreciate what you're saying with respect to the broader picture and the intent of what we're doing here. And so I guess in response to that, I'm looking back at my fellow commissioners as understanding of where we're at, and let them keep that in mind as they
And if I can, in closing,
discuss this.
I think, just as an observation, I think you've been given a very small box based on what the purpose of a variance is.
Well, we ran into that with the McDonald's sign a couple weeks ago, so we understand
And,
completely.
it will always vary based on issues of litigation, but I would again submit to you that this is your release valve. We could have very easily written a code that said any historic building can meet whatever setbacks it can do on a site, right? In other words, we're not going to look at it case by case. We're just going to say if it's historic, it can go anywhere and you can ignore the setbacks. That would be the rule-making way of doing it. But do you really want to say that? Probably not, because every situation is different. So it's hard for us to create a process whereby every unique situation we go back and write the rules, because pretty soon we'll have rules that are so exhaustive and so complex that they won't mean anything. So the tool you have, and I would argue, I don't know what the attorney's advice is, and I don't like arguing with the attorneys, but I don't think you're that constrained. I think you have to find something unique in this situation that would warrant you granting this versus everybody in this neighborhood asking for the same thing. That's how I would explain the real inquiry you're doing is, are you convinced there's enough factual basis that makes this particular request unique to allow them to have less than a 15-foot setback?
Commissioner Levis, Bill, ask you this question. In the McDonald's reader boards, I actually quoted this, and part of the reasons why I thought that was a good project, but I couldn't make the findings was, and I think there's legal issues around this, but the finding says extraordinary or exceptional situation, and those are pretty extreme words. And the other finding says strict application, and I know that's a pretty certain definitive word. And I guess if, based upon what you're saying here today, would it be appropriate for us to reopen and revote on the McDonald's reader boards?
It's hard for me to advise you on that because I don't know the facts. I would say on the strict application, you have evidence very clearly that the strict application of the 15-foot setback would change the character of the request. And that's what Jeff pointed out. Could it be met? Yes, but it subverts the purpose of relocating a historic home and putting it on the site. So that's how you would make that one. I think in terms of comparing it to a sign, this is always the struggle on variances because you're trying to be consistent, but I don't know that you can compare variance to variance to variance. And I would suggest you haven't watched many of these, that if you try to do that, you're probably going to be very frustrated. I think, in my opinion, that every variance should be weighed by you based on the facts that are presented to you. And you need to feel comfortable when you recommend approval or approve a variance that there's enough facts there that you could tell someone else who asked for something similar but not the same why they wouldn't get it.
So if I could ask Bill, where it seems to me that, and maybe I have the wrong orientation, I'd like your response to this, because I do look at the property, not at particularly the activity that the applicant wants to do on the property, because I can always generate hardship by selecting something that, hey, if I can't do that, all firstborn children are going to die. So, should I be able to take that into account? I don't think so. Shouldn't, when we're looking at variances, be looking at what can be done on the property given the existing rules, not so much the specific activity that the current landowner wants to do. do I have that?
So if you look
Backwards?
strictly at the setbacks, I think the argument would be, as Jeff presented, the 15-foot setback is across the city. Every property in the city, right, in that zone, okay. So in this case, what Jeff pointed out to you, because this is a fully developed neighborhood, that setback is not consistent with the neighborhood. So there would be a finding you could make on why you would grant the variance. If you look at all those other properties and they're at 10 feet or 8 feet or whatever, clearly the person who's being harmed in this case is the person who's building the new building because they have a setback that's totally different from everybody. So you could make the finding that that setback is okay because it's consistent with what everybody else in the neighborhood got. Because that is the character of the neighborhood. And again, you can't write the code unless you go to every neighborhood and you know, measure every building and you come up with a rule that says.
So therefore, everybody should get a variance that's on a corner.
In theory, if you wanted to take it to that level of inquiry, you could say everybody in the Newlands who built on a corner lot should in theory be able to go to the same setbacks as existing buildings. I'm not purporting that's the case. I'm just saying factually in this case, Jeff presented to you how you can get to a less than 15-foot setback and justify it based on the character of the area. If you have a brand new lot in a brand new subdivision and somebody comes in and says, I want to do a 8-foot setback, I don't know how you could reach anything factual that would say that justifies it. But when you have a 100-year-old neighborhood, you know, because when we wrote the code, we didn't say, maybe we should have said in Newlands, everywhere in the city except Newlands, this is what it is. But we just, that's not the way we developed the code.
Established, so basically you're saying old established neighborhoods that were built out a long time ago should have less than 15-foot side or frontage setbacks for corner lots.
If the objective is to maintain the character of the neighborhood, which we say as a policy is an objective, right? So you can't really say it in an abstract. You have to say, what are you trying to achieve? If you're trying to achieve a neighborhood that looks like a certain area and maintains its character, then yes, that would be consistent. If you decided that, you know, every part of town should have a very large front yard, so we don't care what it was, we want every house to have a big front yard, then you wouldn't give the variance, right? Because that's inconsistent with what your overall objective is, which is to get larger front yards. In this case, the character of Newlands is the justification for the variance in my mind, because it's consistent with the development pattern that was established years ago.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I don't know if I helped at all or just confused it more. But.
Thank you, Bill. Additional questions? Commissioner Weisky.
Based upon the last line of questioning and answers by Jeff and Bill and Claudia, I get it. And the more I think about the houses on Gordon and Nixon and LaRue as I rode around and drove around the neighborhoods, or this neighborhood, I should say, and even this aerial shows the difference in setbacks. And this is kind of more discussion than it is question, Mr. Chairman. But I guess my question for Jeff at this point, Jeff, if this applicant came forward owning this lot and said, I'm going to build a house that architecturally meets the 1930s designs borrowed from Frank Lloyd Wright or whomever, whatever architect at the time, but I need some more space on it. You're saying that staff would not be in favor of this variance if that was the case? You would say no.
I can't necessarily say that I wouldn't be in favor. I'd have to look at what the specific design was and the character.
But it's not historical.
If I can jump in, we wouldn't be using, we have to look at everything case by case. We would not be making the same arguments that we are today.
Correct.
Okay, okay, fair enough.
Additional questions? Or should we just roll into discussion now that Commissioner Weisky sort of started that? Commissioner Hawkins.
As you well know, and several of you do, I work on several of the homes down in the Newlands area, two including Senator Newlands' first home here in Reno, which is now the home of the Gustons. I am for what's taking place right now, and I think it would be a travesty to watch this go up in a pile of smoke after it was kindling. That's my comment.
Commissioner Griffith. I'll have to circle back to Commissioner
That's
Weiss.
fine.
That's fine.
He didn't use his time. Commissioner Griffith, for the record, as far as we're looking for tonight is the variance, this is the mechanism that we've been given to move forward. And I think that between the discussion and the questions, we've found numerous facts, as Mr. Thomas laid out, that we're looking at the Newlands, we're looking at the time frame that the university has given, we're looking at historical preservation, we're looking at the character, and more importantly, we're looking at a way to maintain and push forward the policies of the master plan. Jeff lists that out in his staff report. They look at 2.2C, 7.5. There's numerous ones that, in my opinion, would back up the factual points that we've seen brought forward that would make this variance go forward. So I'm for this project, and I do, in my mind and in my thought process of it, I can see differences of this and even what we did with the sign. So for me, this is a unique situation, and that's it. I can find that this is consistent with the code that we hope to see, and that was the process that they were hoping to find.
Thank you. Commissioner Marshall, Commissioner Levis, Commissioner Weisky. Yes, I'm going to pass. You're going to pass. I'll weigh in as well. I think I appreciate the discussion about this. I think the last time a variance in the Newlands came before us, we had some pretty specific discussions about it, and ultimately that one did not go through, to my recollection, because it was actually an addition to a historic structure. It was modernizing something. And when I look at this in terms of some of the discussion in terms of strict application and, you know, the hardship term is one that's difficult for me to use, but kind of, you know, the whole thing to me, whether it's the property or the situation or anything, is an exceptional, you know, situation that has not occurred before and probably won't occur after this. I mean, I looked at the image of the house they want to relocate, and I compared it to the house next door. And architecturally, that's kind of what I had to do. And it was perfect, or as perfect as it could be with respect to, as Jeff said and as Claudia said, this is a neighborhood that this house would fit into. It would be a travesty, to use Commissioner Hawkins' term, if this house either went away or went someplace as like a standalone house, you know, like a, you know, museum house up in the outskirts of Washoe County that was saved just to save it. I mean, this is saving it and putting it in a context that makes sense. And if we want to go even further, it's being done by the descendants of the people who lived in that house, you know, back when it was actually a neighborhood. So for looking at a unique situation, for looking at something that I believe is not going to set any kind of precedence moving forward, mainly because of the condition that Jeff put in there specific to this house on this lot because of this situation. I see this as the mechanism by which this variance should be applied. It's applicable to the neighborhood, both setback-wise, contextually, and architecturally, and just the aspect of the priorities of historic preservation that have been, you know, really brought to the forefront as we've moved this master plan forward. To me, this is a perfect example of why the variance exists and something that we should, as a commission, be able to use. So, having said that, I'm open to further discussion or a motion. Commissioner Weisky.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Weisky, I kind of started the discussion, I guess, or the questions, and then I did start the discussion also, didn't I? But because of its uniqueness and the way it's been described and the questions that we've gone through, especially Commissioner Marshall, myself, and Commissioner Olivas, you know, trying to separate property from the structure, this seems backwards. I'm sorry that, you know, there's a time frame that's been put on it that's not part of our time frame. That's not our problem. But I do see the uniqueness of this, and I see this house fitting on the property architecturally with the neighborhood, and I can see the changes in the setbacks. And I'll be voting in favor of it after listening to this discussion tonight. But should any home in this neighborhood ever be damaged and somebody brings forward a variance and I'm still sitting here, I'm going to remember that's not a historical structure anymore, and they're going to be held to our new setbacks and our new requirements, no matter what the design is, because it's no longer a historical structure in a historical neighborhood.
Open to a motion or discussion?
Commissioner Olivas, I'll just add comments. I guess I can see it. It's all altruistic. It's great. It probably should happen, but I am still, it didn't move me far enough. I can't get there. I mean, when we look at things like, again, I'll say the sign, that was less, that was everything that even the real sign wanted, the sign people were against. They were even for it, and I just think that the underlying reasons and the timeline and the fact that the university is going to tear it down, that's it's all unfortunate, but it doesn't move me why there's a hardship on the property. The property was bought in anticipation of this too, so the rules were known at the time that the property was purchased. So I think that some of those arguments don't carry a lot of weight either, but it just didn't move me far enough.
And just because I wanted to respond to that, I agree with you, but the signage issue for me was different because there was a specific line in code that prohibited that kind of sign. This is a setback issue by which variances give us a little more leeway. So I appreciate what you're saying, and I appreciate where you're coming down on it, but that's how I'm able to distinguish the two, is that there was a very specific line that outlawed that particular item, and we couldn't get around it in my mind. So, but I appreciate exactly where you're going from with that. Mr. Griffith.
Commissioner Griffith, I'm prepared to make a motion.
There's no additional discussion. I'm prepared to hear it.
Okay. In the case number LDC 18-00090, based upon compliance with the applicable findings, I move to approve variance subject to conditions 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Thank you. Commissioner Hawkins? Is
Mr. Hawkins, I'm a yay on that.
that a second?
Second on that.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Additional discussion.
Yes, I'd like to.
Commissioner Marshall.
I'm going to vote against the motion, not because I don't want the house saved, despite the guilt trip that's being put on here. I really think that the vehicle that we're trying to force this into is not the correct vehicle. It really disturbs me that we want the ends so badly that we're willing to twist the requirements for a variance that's only going to come back and haunt us. I think if this is really what we want to do, then we should set the rules appropriately for this neighborhood if we think it's a different situation. But we are essentially legislating with a variance, and just hearing that some other person was denied a variance because they didn't meet the setbacks for their addition is just, to me, evidence of why we are this is an ad hoc decision rather than a principled one. So I'll be voting no on the motion.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
The motion carries 4 votes to 2 with Commissioner Olivas and Commissioner Marshall opposed. Okay, we're going to move on to item 6.5, case number LDC 18-00073, Red Rock Mega Storage.
Hi.
Hello.
Savannah Russell, Summit Engineering. Here with me today is Tom Gallagher and Marty Shanks. They are here to answer any engineering questions you may have on the project. So we are here for a special use permit on Red Rock Mega Storage located at 8805 Red Rock Road. It's approximately 12 acres. The zoning is community commercial, and we are here for a special use permit for residential adjacency. Oop. So the RV mini storage facility is approximately 200,000 square feet. It's going to be completed in 2 phases. Phase 1 will be 4 storage buildings and a rental office, complete with an RV wash area for the tenants of the site, which will be located on the north end of the parcel. Phase 2 will be 4 storage buildings on the south end of the parcel, and the rental office will be operated during normal business hours. Just a general vicinity map. The site is above the 395 Red Rock Road interchange. And a closer view of it, we've got industrial to the northeast, neighborhood commercial and residential to the southeast, community commercial to the south, and then BLM land to the west. Our site plan, so we're here for a special use permit for residential adjacency for that southeast corner. And as you can kind of see here, that corner we're not developing, it's left out. It's actually a drainage channel, and the rest of that area will be vegetated. So the main entrance and south is phase 2, the main entrance, and then north is phase 1. There will be a gated main entrance at the Red Rock Road and Moya intersection as shown here. And then secondary emergency access on the north end of the parcel, as you can see.
Can you use the cursor on the mouse to move
sorry.
there? Thank you.
So the main entrance is here. Here's Moya, Red Rock Road, and then our secondary access is right here, emergency access, sorry. Our southeast corner that we're leaving out of the development that abuts residential parcels is here. And then our there's a car wash as well located on the north end, and then we have our retention and detention basin on the north point of the parcel. At the entrance, it's gated, and there is enough room for 2 RV stacking and enough room for turnaround. Our landscaping, we're above the 15% landscape requirement. We're at 23% landscape. And we have landscaping all along Red Rock Road frontage that will screen the development to Red Rock Road. Our lighting, the entire site is fully lit for security. However, no spillover lighting is anticipated, according to the photometric study that you see here. So our buildings, here's an elevation of Building A. It's kind of the front building of the development. All buildings use a combination of appropriate colors and materials to complement surrounding developments. All the buildings have horizontal and vertical articulation as required by code. And no windows will be located that would impact surrounding residential developments. The main entrance, it's not shown here, but will be metal and open view gating and will be access controlled. And like I said, turnaround will be available in front of those gates before you get into the development. The rental office is located at the main entrance of the site and is accessible from the outside of the property by vehicle and pedestrian traffic. Our utilities, Tumwa will serve water and will come out of Red Rock Road. Electric and gas will come from NB Energy, and the developer actually has plans for solar panel usage in the future once the development gets going. And then sewer will be served by City of Reno. And from the site plan, we're going to force main from the car wash to that main entrance area near the office, and then gravity it from the office to existing facilities in Moya Boulevard. Stormwater. So we are retaining all of the increase from the 100-year 10-day flood event and detaining the increase from the 100-year 24-hour flood event. With final plans, we will be detaining 10% more stormwater than is required by City of Reno. The existing stormwater will be routed to the existing drainage channel on the southeast corner of the parcel and to the drainage pond on the north end of the parcel. Newly developed stormwater will be routed on site to the retention and detention pond located at the north, as seen here. And water usage from the car wash has actually been overestimated in our application, that to the level of a public car wash. The design of that will be efficient design and will recycle all water used, which will greatly reduce the water requirement for that. Traffic, so this proposed use and square footage did not trigger a traffic study. However, we got one done anyway, and it showed minimal impacts to traffic with the mini storage use. The RTC has plans to widen Red Rock Road from Moya Boulevard to Evans Ranch, and that widening of the road, our projects takes into account that widening. So, and then additionally, subsequent sidewalk, curb and gutter will be installed as that widening is completed. As brought up in public comment, the plans for the intersection, so we need to install a traffic arm at the Moya Boulevard and Red Rock Road intersection. That will be done at the expense of the developer, as well as the left turn lane will be provided to provide left turns into the project. That will also be done by the developer, and that just that's just restriping of that intersection, which is actually, I will show you here. So just to zoom in, so that traffic arm will go right here. We will add a crosswalk in right here, and then that restriping will take place right here. And so, like I said, all of our plans take into account that RTC widening. All of the intersection improvements will be done by the developer that I mentioned. And all of these plans have been reviewed by RTC and city engineering staff. Any questions?
All right, well, we'll get back to you on the questions after we hear the staff's presentation, so thank you. All right. Brooke, welcome.
Good evening, Commissioners. Brooke Oswald, Associate Planner for the record. I want to thank the applicant for going over the portion of that. I do have a few more things to add to that. First off, there were no, this did go to the Neighborhood Advisory Board. There were no written comments at that. There were some concerns about the traffic noted at that. And then I've received no additional written or verbal comments on this, this project. We have an amendment that was sent out today. I just want to go over it really quick. It's amendment on number 7. It deals with the portion of the RTC and how that land will be. It was requested by the applicant that the language be moved from, Michelle, can you move in a little bit? From dedicate to set aside, because that negotiation will happen between RTC and that of how that land is acquired, and not really part of this SUP at this point. Secondly, there was another an error within condition 4, and it's where the drainage of this will initially go to in that closed basin. It is not Swan Lake, it is Silver Lake, and so we would ask that that amendment be amended as this moves forward. I'd like to just go over the overall area and the site and what's going on there. As you can see, the very large industrial to the north, the large neighborhood portion off to the east is the industrial, large residential off to the south. The property there being, you can see the loop. To the north of that is federal property. It is very steep hillside, undevelopable at this point, and currently not in the city boundary. The boundary runs down that way, and so it is bordering up to county. There are some additional additional businesses that have started going around the exit of 78 there. As the applicant noted, RTC will be expanding that roadway all the way to Evans Ranch down to Moya, and there's currently a signal there at Moya Boulevard and Red Rock Road. To look at the zoning, the parcel is a very unique parcel. It is a triangular parcel, relatively flat except for a small portion of hillside that does come into that side. It is zoned community commercial. Directly adjacent to that is a neighborhood commercial section, a single family 6,000 square foot lot down about around the bottom there, about 60 feet of the total 1,700 feet of frontage, and then that large industrial planned unit development up on the other portion of the property. In this, we did look at the context of the single-family neighborhood and the neighborhood commercial. One of our conditions, condition 13, we asked that the applicant take their signage from the community commercial down to the neighborhood commercial. We felt that was more appropriate for both the single-family and that context of that intersection. Why I have this up, I would like to speak. We are here for a special use permit tonight. In that community commercial zone, there are several other uses that are permitted by right that we would consider to be generate much more traffic and also be much more intense use of sewage and generation. That could be a fast food restaurant, drive-throughs, restaurant, bar, a number of that. So that is permitted by right on that site. We are here for the SUP for that residential adjacency. Those would also be in that sense. Where else was, so the sign and the signage on this. In that CC zone, they are allowed up to a 35-foot in height pole that could be lit any way they want. The lighting just cannot face industrial, or the residential, excuse me. Versus the NC, it takes it down to a 8-foot pedestal sign, which is more appropriate to the neighboring properties of the neighborhood commercial and the residential. The applicant did discuss the entry. I would like to talk about the car wash a little bit more. It is located down here at the end of the side. This is adjacent what would be those large industrial buildings. We found that to be an appropriate place for that to happen, away from the residential, away from that neighborhood commercial down in that area. Several of the conditions that were put forth came from the SEPTED review, crime prevention through environmental planning review done by the police. That included the condition that they have an open view fence along the front to provide security and be able to look into the site. The single access point, there is another gate located down by the car wash that will have to be locked and only used for emergency situations. The car wash will be limited only to the tenants of the complex open and will not only and not be open to the public. There is a manager's quarters. So there will be a manager on site. As part of that, the manager's quarters needs to maintain a 70% visibility so that they're able to see in, and also the police are able to monitor the manager's quarters and what's going on there. The rest of the site can be fenced. They have proposed a integrated concrete fencing material for that that's in line with the colors that they were proposing architecturally. As far as The landscape, as Savannah mentioned, they are over the landscape. We have looked to provide extra landscape along that frontage and along that long building, architectural building frontage to help continue to break up that large building mass and how that moves forward. Just to look at the architecture one more time. One of the things that is unique about this site and that this particular use allows is that for that stepping of that, the building is about 20 feet high. With your end pieces, the two corner capstone pieces extending to about 25 feet high to the peak of the roof there. They've used multiple colors in that Reno Stead joint corridor plan. I hope I got that right. They do recommend and look to use natural materials that fit the rural nature of the area. I think the applicant has moved forward to also to show a color palette that I believe fits that staff feels fits that description, and also using the rock and the intercolored fencing to fit that. With the conditions, staff can make all the findings and recommends approval of this project. Thank you. If you do have any more questions, please available.
Thank you, Brooke. Appreciate that. This is a public hearing. I do have at least one request to speak for him, but before we get to that, I will bring it to the commission for disclosures, starting with Commissioner Olivas.
I visited the site.
Commissioner Marshall, no disclosures.
Commissioner Johnson, no disclosures.
Commissioner Griffith, no disclosures.
Commissioner Hawkins visited the site, talked to the applicant's representative.
Commissioner Weisky, as did I.
Okay, since this is a public agenda item, I have one request to speak for him here from Russ Earl.
Good evening. Russ Earl, Silver Knolls Community Organization, for the record. I see one glaring issue with this, with the planning. This is in the joint planning corridor. It went to your NABs. It never went to the CABs. We didn't know anything about this project until about a week ago when they put up their yellow signs about this meeting tonight. You know, I respect the people that live in the city of Reno and that go to the NABs, but the people that live to the county just to the north of this Reno property line are the ones that are having to deal with the traffic. I understand this isn't a huge traffic issue, but they're saying they're going to restripe the road. Well, what lane are we going to lose that we currently have right now that they just redid? Because there's no width to add an additional turn lane into this property that I can see without eliminating one of the other lanes that they just put in there. So that's my first problem I have. Second of all, they say they're going to do the 100-year flood. I don't know if anybody's gone over and looked at the Amazon retention basin when it rains. They've had nothing but problems with erosion, breaches going underneath 395, and we all know that goes to Swan Lake. So I'm not so certain they're going to contain all of their stormwater runoff. And just to the northeast of that is Elk Pond, which is a nature preserve. It's owned by the Nevada Nature Conservancy. Amazon had a problem when they built that warehouse, or not Amazon, excuse me, Petco built that they contaminated that pond a couple times. I can see the runoff from this, it goes right over. If they don't pipe all the way through the hillside that they built with that Petco and get it into the storm channel over there, that we're gonna have the same thing, that we're gonna contaminate that. Additionally, RTC, yes, they say that they're gonna widen Red Rock Road. They don't have a time frame. There's no known time when that's going to happen. They said as needed depending on development. So the best guess on that might be, although I know the engineer here has something to do with Evans Ranch, but that hasn't moved forward yet. Silver Hills hasn't moved forward yet. So in the near future, while this is being built, we're tens of years away before Red Rock actually sees any widening, and there's no money in the budget right now for that anyhow. So those are some other things to consider with this, but my biggest one is we were not notified until a week ago. So we were never able to come to the NAB, make our concerns known, and get input on this. Oh, also on the north end where they're doing, there's no elevation on their maps that I see. The lowest area where they're going to be putting in their car wash is a bog right now. So are they going to have to increase the elevation which will increase the height of the buildings. I know with the PUD, with Petco, they did not adhere to what you folks put in that PUD, and they put their lighting to about 30 feet when they were supposed to be at 18 feet. So we're supposed to be dark skies to the north of that, and we get all sorts of ambient light. It's bad enough with the airport, but I understand for safety they have to have it. They need it for security. But can there be any way to temper that light so the light is shown only on the buildings and not the surrounding areas? Because you do have, to the east of that, residences over there, so they're not going to really appreciate bright lights either. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This is the only request to speak form I have. Would you like to make a statement on this one? I would, sir. Okay, just fill out a form when you're done. Thank you.
Michael Welling, resident in the Red Rock area. There's no elevation on that, on the, I don't know where the maps are, on the corner where they want to put in the retention and the wash there. That is actually the highest part of the property. It actually makes a turn there and goes up into Red Rock. So in actuality, they're putting their wash area at the highest part so that the water goes the opposite direction of where they want it to flow. I know it's engineered. I know that Summit Engineering has been involved in this and the likes, but nonetheless, we take an end of the property there that is already breached. I've already been on the phone with the city about it, and they haven't even been out there to go ahead from the last flood episode out there to even redo the trench and put it back in so that the water will go away from there. So we have an issue there. The road is a concern because it's not going to build out. We're going to still have 5 lanes there, and that's as far as we can go. They want open fence. Well, the open fence is going to go to a wall, okay? But the bottom line is that the property is zoned what it is. It's not zoned for mini storage. As you guys were just here a minute ago and said it doesn't fit the criteria, it isn't what it's supposed to be, it's zoned for this, and you want us to change it to that. Well, the fact is that whether they have bought this, they're gonna buy this, they're thinking about buying it, the bottom line is that it's not zoned for this. So the fact is that I don't know why we keep buying property and then we come to you and ask you for a special use permit or changes in what we have there. Let's draw the line in the sand and say you bought it knowing what it is and what it's supposed to be used for, because we have just had lively discussion about the same thing. You know what it is. You know, black is black and white is white. And I'm asking you guys to say no to what they want to do, even though there might be a possibility that this could be good. We don't need lighted skies. We already have that because of Petco, because of Aero Electronics. I mean, we've got green lights you can see from my house 4 miles away from what's already there. They flash all night. And I can't do anything about it. Please help us with this. Draw the line. Draw the line and say no. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to make a public comment on this? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to the commission for questions. Who'd like to get it started? Commissioner Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a lot for the applicant or her representative then. The hot topic just a second ago was zoning. Are we zoned correctly for this?
Yes, so the use is allowed in zone. Just because we are bordering residential, we have to get a special use permit just because of residential adjacency.
How about us being in the cooperative zone?
Brooklyn.
And if the CAB hasn't been notified, joint planning, how do we take care of that?
Brooke Oswald, Associate Planner for the record. This, as Savannah mentioned, it is for residential adjacency. Also in the CC zone, that mini storage is permitted but does require an SUP. There are some additional caveats that were in the staff report for that. As far as the cab, our noticing is the 750 feet for that, and I think I would defer to our planning manager of that process.
Claudia Hanson, Planning Manager. In the joint plan, amendments to the joint plan go to the NAB and the CAB. Just a project within that meets the policies of the joint plan and meets code would just go through the standard Planning Commission process.
So these folks from Silver Knolls don't get the opportunity to speak, is that?
No, actually, the opportunity to speak is at the Planning Commission. This is the primary place to voice concerns and be completely, receive the complete application presentation. A NAB is for another opportunity to present that information. NABs are there to receive the information and provide comments back, just like the fire department or the health department or the school district. We would look at the NAB the same way to provide that information back, but the Planning Commission is the appropriate place for the complete presentation and commenting.
So if this is a joint planning area, such as the property we just talked about 3 weeks ago up on the hill, why does that differ than what we're looking at tonight?
So the one up on the hill, the Echeverria case, I think is the one you're talking about, that was an amendment to the plan. So that was a proposal to amend the actual plan and change the boundaries. This is staying within the boundaries, meeting the policies that were established through the joint process with the NAB and the CAB and both planning commissions and the council and the commission. So that the joint plan was established through all of the joint planning process. If the project meets the plan and the policy, then it goes straight forward as it would any other project, as long as it meets the policies of the joint plan, which in this case it does. If they were amending to remove this area from the plan or change the designation within the plan, then we would be looking at the joint process and go to the NAB and the CAB. But in this case, it would just be the NAB.
Okay.
You still going?
I'm going to get my notes refreshed
Okay,
here. I'll be back.
I'll turn to Commissioner Weisky then, if you're still working.
Brooke, please. Brooke, I didn't see a condition for hours of operation. Can you tell me what the hours of operation based upon this zoning is?
Yes, Brooke Oswald, Associate Planner for the record. The hours of operation in the zoning are from 6 to 11. To go past 11 in that time would require a special use permit to go later than those hours. Staff felt that was an appropriate, especially for the lower intensity of this use, that was an appropriate time to allow them to have normal hours of operation.
Okay, and that's Sunday through Saturday?
Correct.
Okay. Dark skies, I didn't see a condition regarding dark skies.
There is a condition, I believe it is.
Did I miss it?
Yes.
Okay, I'm
So
sorry.
there was a dark skies condition on that. We did look at the lighting very carefully on that because of that, the rural nature and of that area. 12? It's condition 12.
Thank you.
And it does require dark skies. The buildings, the lighting is really to the interior, the way that site is designed, so it really limits a lot of that glare just by the architectural design of the building. And then additionally, we did the dark skies for that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hawkins, did you find your notes?
I've got them.
Perfect.
Brooke, thank you. Is there anything in the conditions, because I've read them twice, and I don't see anything about a grease interceptor in there?
When that comes in for the car wash, I imagine that's what you're speaking about for the grease interceptor. That would be, they would look at that as a whole, and that would go through the county health as far as the grease interceptor and how that would be handled. And so we did not have a condition for that to be put in because it is looked at by another agency.
And I take it you said 6 to 11 on business hours?
Correct.
Because there's been several storage units we've looked at over the last 2 years I've been here, and there's never been anything go to 11 o'clock as far as business hours. Is there a reason why this one's special?
Just, I think with the community commercials, some of the other intensity of the use off 395 there and that. We can speak to the applicant if they would be willing to if that is a concern, if they would be willing to put in another condition on hours, and I can speak to them about that.
Okay, for the applicant, please. Talk
So-
to me about the turn lane going inside from off of Moya or even coming off Red Rock.
Okay, can I get my slide up here? Okay. Okay, so right here, so we're restriping this turn lane in. Right now, there is a one left-hand turn lane onto Red Rock from Moya, and there's one lane at this intersection continuing on Red Rock Road. So pretty much what we're doing is taking away that second lane here and making it into that left-hand turn into the project.
And so you're just liable for putting in the paint.
Yes, right?
But we're not widening the surface any. We're just restriping, right?
Restriping, yeah.
Talk to me about permeable surfaces for this, since it's gonna be 200,000 square feet or
I'll bring my engineer up for that.
Tom Gallagher with Summit Engineering. I'm Savannah's engineer tonight. In the way of the impervious area on this site, what we have not taken into account any permeability on the site itself. We're detaining and retaining the amount of water that comes off of this site on the end of the site. So we haven't assumed that it's going to have a bunch of water soaking into the site. It's not, when it starts raining, naturally, you know, that if it's dry, the soil has to reach what they call a soil moisture holding content. And then it's just like pouring water on concrete after it reaches that point. But we're not assuming that it's going to be dry. We're assuming all of the precipitation in the two storms that Savannah talked about will be taken care of. And I think there's a couple of unique things with the drainage plan that you ought to realize. That hillside that comes down to the site, there is water that comes off that hillside. And what we're doing is we're taking that water around the site both ways. So that water never impacts the area of the site. It goes right back to where it was coming from in the first place. So let me see if I know how to run this. I don't know if I do.
You just point with your finger, Tom. It's on the overhead there.
Point with my finger. Oh, okay. Right here, there's a high spot on the site, and the drainage is in channels that are independent from the site drainage itself.
Can you grab the microphone and bring it with you? Thank you.
I don't want to break anything. I'm not used to all this stuff. It brings the water around here, discharges into the box culvert that goes under the road here. And from here, it'll be in another channel that goes north into the detention facility and into a culvert that goes underneath the road into the creek. They basically come to the same point they came to before. But we are going an extra distance in detaining and retaining more water on site than what's required by code. Does that answer your question?
answers that one. I have one more. The 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that is residents on that property are really close to it. Does that still meet the residential adjacency?
That's not going to reach the residential
It won't
adjacency
re-
because we're
won't
tearing
reach
it
your
down.
property line?
We're tearing that one down.
Okay,
That's on the property.
right.
And the residential adjacency is to those two lots right on the very corner down there. And as Savannah stated, that area is being left as open space in our project.
One last question for Savannah. Exhaust fumes from the RVs that's going to be parked there, and how long are they going to be under regulation to run? If I was in a home where the wind blows that trash over into my house, and trash, I'm talking about diesel fumes, what's your regulations or your signage going to be in there so those RVs don't sit there and decide to run anytime they want and blow that ugly stuff over into the residential area.
That is also a question for Tom.
Probably one I'm going to make up an answer for. This is simply a storage facility. This is not RV parking.
So you
This
have
is-
no parking there for RVs?
No
'Cause I
RV
thought that was talked about when,
No.
when the initial talk went
No,
on.
it's RV storage. It's all indoor. It's all climate controlled. It's all sprinkled. We've been through this with the fire marshal and everything else. And no, there won't be any RVs sitting there running their generators or running their engines or anything like that. Although some people have a lot of trouble backing an RV up, that might take a little bit of time. But they're not intended to have them outside at any time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Additional questions? Commissioner Marshall?
Janelle? Or, I'm sorry. I'm looking at condition number 4 with the substitution of silver for Swan Lake. It was identified. But it's my understanding that Silver Lake is connected to Swan Lake. So my question is, shouldn't it be both?
Good evening, Commissioners. Frank Peralta, Associate Civil Engineer for the record. The discharge, it discharges into Silver Lake, not Swan Lake.
No, I understand that, but isn't Silver Lake connected hydraulically to Swan Lake?
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you.
Janelle Thomas, Senior Civil Engineer for the record. Yeah, those two basins are not connected hydraulically. They are completely separate closed basins, which have separate discharges to them.
Have we been, for some reason I've heard multiple people, and maybe it's just the Swan Lake Committee that says that there is pumping from Silver to Swan Lake.
And that is a correct statement, that statement has been made, but that is not true.
So
That
there's
is
no-
that is not factual.
There's no pumping from Silver Lake into Swan Lake.
No, there is not.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Question for anyone in the group that wants to field this one on pedestrian and your sidewalk that you're gonna, or your crosswalk that you're gonna put in. Is that gonna be a stutter flash like you see around UNR? Or what's it gonna be? People travel at insane speeds right in there because they've passed me by before. And just having a crosswalk there isn't gonna cut it. It's gotta be something like what UNR has coming down Sierra Street.
So it's a fully signalized intersection, so it's not needed. So it's just going to be, sorry.
When we finish with the intersection improvements, it's a fully signalized intersection, just like any other intersection. When the light turns green, you can walk. And that's what it will be when this
Okay.
project is done.
All right.
Brooke, I have a question for you. And I'm just trying to understand, I know we're talking about the roadway work, and that there's a comment in here, your staff report, that talks about the applicant opting to defer the construction of the public improvements to the Red Rock Road widening project and paying the RRIF. Is this getting back to the idea that there's a future project that the idea is they're not going to widen anything? They're just going to wait until that happens? I guess, can you explain that statement a little further to me in terms of what's
Yes,
happening there?
so there are plans to expand Red Rock Road to Evans Ranch out to 4 lanes. And with that, what they are deferring is the improvements that would have to happen. So if they were required to put in a sidewalk in that, they are sort of deferring to that point with that TIF to have that come in with that road improvement, and that would happen. I can have Janelle or Frank could probably speak more intelligently on the engineering side of that road.
Okay. So Janelle, just to follow up on what Brooke's saying, so basically the sidewalk that's shown along Red Rock Road would not be required to go in until the expansion of Red Rock Road occurs?
No, with the Janelle Thomas, senior civil engineer for the record, as a part of their improvements for their site, new development does require that pedestrian connectivity, so they would be required to place that. Staff would work with the applicant in order to make sure that that's placed appropriately so that it doesn't get removed with a future project. Again, that comes back to the recommended condition amendment to condition 7 to change the word dedicate to set aside. That has to do with that whole subject matter, is that they're going to set aside that dedicated right-of-way or that right-of-way land. Right now, it's not within the capital improvement project time limit, which is the first 10 years of the regional transportation plan. And so it's been determined that there is not an ability to receive a waiver for dedication of right-of-way except in that first 10-year timeframe. So the way that the Regional Road Impact Fee Program operates is that projects as they're developed are required to pay their respective fees for their development, the impact of their development, to the RTC, and those fees get used for the upcoming projects. It is divided into a north service area and a south service area. So this project would actually be served by the north. But their decision to, I guess, stated is defer that construction. Right now, it's not determined to be triggered at this moment by this particular project for that to be constructed, for those improvements to be constructed. Therefore, it's advised that they would wait for that project to come forward as a more regional project, and then it could be completed at that time,
Okay.
at the more appropriate time.
And then to follow along, since you're here, and Commissioner Hawkins brought up the question on the traffic. If I was understanding the interchange modification correctly, and it might be best, Michelle, if you can put the PowerPoint back up, because I think Savannah left it on that page. And maybe I'm just trying to understand this. It looks like from this, currently, from Moya Boulevard heading to the west, there are 2 lanes currently, based on a turn lane and a continual through lane on Red Rock Road. And that this would modify that by taking a portion of that and turning it into the turn lane into the site. Is that correct?
Yes.
And has that been looked at from traffic standpoint? Obviously, I understand a traffic report's not required, but certainly there's knowledge of the traffic on that road. Has staff looked at that and had their thoughts about that?
Yeah, so city has looked at it, as well as RTC, since it is a regional road, and they have provided comment. I'm going to actually defer to the engineer who has more intimate knowledge of the striping as it's going to occur.
You were just sitting there. I figured somebody else had to get you out of your seat.
Right. So it's actually the
Can
south
you
end.
state your name so Michelle gets you
Marty
to the record?
Shanks, civil designer for Summit.
Thank you.
On the south side, which is the right side, that's where it goes from 1 lane to 2 lanes on Red Rock Road. Right here. There's 2 lanes going south, right there, or I think it's south. And we're just taking part of it and turning it into a left turn lane, so it just merges to 2 lanes at the end of the taper right here. So we're just merging the 2 lanes back a little bit.
Okay.
Because it goes from 1 through lane here, and it just continues and turns into 2 through lanes.
Okay.
After the taper.
All right, that answers that question. Thank you. Commissioners, additional questions? Commissioner Hawkins.
I have one more. On the analysis on page 4, top of the page, auction sales of storage items on the premises are prohibited. So I take it there will be no storage wars ever out there. Because usually if
That's a
somebody
pretty
doesn't pay
unique
their
question.
bill, they get their stuff auctioned.
That's a pretty unique question. I really wasn't expecting that, but that may also be up to the court. It's not intended to have storage wars out there. If you look at the stuff on phase 2, those are very large units, and they're going to be climate controlled, and they're for big motorhomes and that type of thing. But storage wars, I'm going to have to put that on the checklist, Claudia, I think. And I really don't see that happening.
Okay.
But if
I
it does
had to
happen,
bring it up because it's going to go on record, that's all.
well, I
That's-
don't see it
that's-
happening.
Yeah.
But I
See,
think
because I can't come by later on and say, well, you said you were not going to have storage wars, but I see signs out there for auctions. I just want something on black and white, so when that day comes, if it does, that I can say, we talked about this.
I guess we did. And if we're going to make everything legal and everything, and you have everybody else fill up comment cards, I think you ought to have Bill Thomas fill one out, and I think you ought to have to give him his ID.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Frank, did you have something to add?
Hi, Frank Peralta, Associate Civil Engineer for the record. Just a clarification that Red Rock from Moya Boulevard to Evans Ranch will be widened by 2026.
Okay. Thank you. Discussion. Awkward silence. I'm open to anything. Commissioner Weisky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The case number of LDC 18-00073, Red Rock Mega Storage. Based upon compliance with the applicable findings, I move to approve the special use permit subject to conditions, including amendments to condition number 4 and 7, as have been presented by staff tonight. And I can make all of the findings.
Thank you. I have a motion. I have a second. Commissioner
Levis, I'll second that, and I can make all the findings.
Motion a second. Additional discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
That's, Commissioner Marshall is opposed. Motion carries. And I will read into the record the appeal process. Any final action, not including recommendations or failure to take action by the Planning Commission, may be appealed to the Reno City Council by the applicant, the mayor, or a city council member, or any person who is aggrieved by the action or inaction. An appeal, together with fees, must be filed with the city clerk within 10 calendar days, starting on the day after written notice of the action is filed with the city clerk. And if the 10th calendar day falls on a weekend or holiday when the clerk's office is not open, the appeal may be filed on the next business day. And before moving on, I am going to take a 10-minute break for the commission to use the restroom, and we will be back at 8:40. Commissioner Hawkins.
Down, I'd like something clarified with staff and looked into. If Petco, since this was brought up during our meeting, if Petco is not abiding by the conditions for the height of their light poles and emitting more than what their dark sky lights are supposed to do, I want them fined, code enforcement take care of them, and you make sure these residents don't have to see that crap out in the desert. That's it, I'm on record.
Thank you, Commissioner Hawkins. So, Frank, I ask you guys to look into that. All right, we'll take a break till 8:40. All right, I'm going to bring this back to order. And we'll move on to item 6.6, case number LDC 18-00079, the Coyote Crossing Master Plan and Zoning Map Amendments. Mike, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening. For the record, Mike Raley with Rubicon Design Group, here representing the project applicant. The project site that we're considering tonight is in Panther Valley at the western terminus of Rockchuck Road. And what we're requesting is a master plan amendment to redesignate 8.76 acres of property that's currently designated as open space in the new Reimagine Reno master plan to single-family neighborhood, and a zone change from SF15 and a mix of open space to SF6. This is the project site. The first picture here shows there's an old abandoned railroad grade that crosses the site. This is looking from the end of Rockchuck kind of to the northwest, and then this is looking back across the site to the east. The site was originally zoned a mix of medium-density suburban and open space in Washoe County. And when the Washoe County zoning was applied, way back when, probably in the late 80s, I'm assuming is when the Washoe County applied the zoning, they didn't have the mapping technology that we have today. In fact, if you look at how the county used to process tentative maps, for example, in the 90s, they would actually adjust their zoning boundary as part of your tentative map request, because when you came in with actual topographic data, they looked at that data and they would adjust the lines accordingly. And so when this got annexed in, it's just nothing had ever been proposed on this property, and it translated over. So I'll go in a few minutes and show you kind of how we feel it's not appropriate for open space, or at least the entire site, but that's kind of how the open space zoning came to be. If you look at the previous master plan, I know this is addressed in the staff report, about half of the site was actually designated as single family, and then somehow when the update came through, it essentially got missed. I know there's thousands of parcels that got looked at, and so this was just one that kind of fell through the cracks. So this is a slope analysis of the project site. And based on the Reno code, if you look at what a hillside development is, this does not qualify for a hillside development. In fact, this shows right here, about 97% of the site is 15% slope or less. So everything you see in green is 15% or less. And then as you get over here on the west side, there are some areas where you get into 20% slope. So we worked with Sienna to essentially amend our zoning boundaries to take only the areas that are 15% or less slope in the zone change, and everything that's over 15% leave as open space in the master plan, and both with the master plan and the zoning. So what you see here is the proposed master plan designation. As you see, single family neighborhood, which matches everything around it, with that area of open space, which is just over an acre, about 1.18 acres left as open space that reflects kind of the steeper area. These open space areas that you see here were dedicated open space with the adjoining subdivisions. So they're owned by homeowners associations, and so those will be left as permanent open space. And it gets much steeper as you go to the north, and then that ridge line kind of wraps around. So when you get to the west is really where the steepness starts. Kind of consistent with the master plan amendment, this is our proposed zoning. The SF6 would allow for 6,000 square foot lots. Although these areas up here are zoned, some of the areas are zoned SF15. It's kind of a mishmash of SF15 to SF9. They use clustering, so a lot of the lots that you see up here are actually 6,000 square foot lots. So at the end of the day, we plan to follow this up with a tentative map that will be essentially an extension of the existing single family uses that are out there now. We did have favorable comments from the Ward 4 NAB when we presented it. Also held a notice community meeting. We had 5 attendees at that meeting, all of which were supportive of the project. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Mike. We'll let you know. Get a report from staff. Sienna, welcome.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the Commission. For the record, Sienna Reed, Senior Planner. Just going to move this down a scooch.
All right, so might give you a good overview of the requested amendments that you have before you tonight. I do want to add just a few quick points, really in terms of the approach to this master plan and zone change. What it would afford is really a greater variety of single-family housing options in this particular area while really looking to protect those steeper portions of the site. Mike went into a fair bit of detail there, but did want to also note that the site is considered an infill development site. We have really kind of surrounding development to the south and the east. Extension of services to the site is very feasible, and it is already served by existing public safety services. It also has close proximity to employment opportunities to the south that you can see just south of the railroad, and also easy access on 395 up to commercial and other employment opportunities at the intersection of 395 and Lemon Drive. I did want to also note, just to wrap up here, that the requested master plan amendment, while it would really allow predominantly for those detached single-family housing options, this is a product that the city does need in the future. We have an identified need for a range of housing options, and kind of within that, there are different places in the city that are appropriate for different master plan and land use designations, as you can see on the map overhead. This particular area is, for the most part, north and east of the railroad, an established single-family area. So within the single-family neighborhood master plan land use, did want to note that the single-family 6,000 square foot lot zoning district is the most intense zoning district within that particular master plan land use category. And the Ward 4 Neighborhood Advisory Board did weigh in on the particular request in May. There were no concerns expressed. And in terms of calls, I've really just received 2 calls wanting to know more about when this item is scheduled, and that was more to the noticing error that was previously had for this particular item. So with that, I'm available for any questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you, Sienna. This is again, public item, and I have one public comment form. Before I do that, I will ask the commission for disclosure, starting with Commissioner Weisky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm familiar with the site, and I spoke with the applicant's representative.
Commissioner Hawkins, as did I.
Commissioner Griffith, no disclosures.
Commissioner Johnson, no disclosures.
Commissioner Marshall, no disclosures.
Commissioner Levis, I visited the site.
Okay, the first comment card I have is from Nick Vonderville.
First off, I got to say I respect you guys a ton. You guys coming out here and doing a great job. Nothing but respect.
Hey, Nick, go ahead and say your name.
My name is Nick Vanderville. I represent the people of Panther Valley and of Rock Chuck Road. First off, they did say that 5 people came to their meeting. I live right across the street. I didn't get a notice. So for any future community meetings, I'd like to ask that they do a better job of getting people notifications of when the meetings are going to be and where they're at. My neighbor and I, neither of us received anything, and we're the 2 closest properties to the proposed project. On that note, this has been an area that has been continually proposed for new developments. I've lived there for 20 years. I haven't seen no problem with them actually doing the project and moving forward with this. I do have problems with the lot sizes. I don't feel like the area can really accommodate much more traffic. I do have a couple videos, if I can show you guys, of the only accessible road to actually get into the valley, if you don't mind.
Michelle can just put them on the screen there for you.
This is one of Rock Chuck Road here. Can you zoom in for me? You can see the road was originally intended to go through to the next development. The project was stopped. Now we are left with half a road with 1 lane accessible through traffic. It's been talked about. John and Todd did say that they're planning on finishing the road off, but it really is a 1-lane road down here at the bottom of Rock Chuck. That will definitely have to be addressed before they move forward with more homes. It's been a very quiet neighborhood, and up until now, we've really had no traffic. You can see how small the lanes are and how bad it is with parking and everything down here. So I'm going to stop there and I'm going to go back. If that's not bad enough, we have another road here that is up above. The main accessible road is Chisholm Trail, which is how you actually get into the valley. And you can see people actually park on the sidewalks because it's so bad. When Lenark Homes came in and they developed their new development up top here, they did not plan for the amount of traffic that comes through here. The roads were not widened. And even on this road, there's accessibility is down to one car at a time. So I question whether this new development can support the traffic, that these roads can support the traffic for this new development. I asked you guys to consider anything additional that might need to be done to accommodate for all the extra homes and traffic. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to make a public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to the commission for questions. Commissioner Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for Mike. Gentleman just spoke that he wasn't noticed, and that kind of bothers me. Can you take me through the steps of?
Sure. We get the noticing list from the city of Reno. We use the exact same noticing list that goes out with the mail, so I can't explain why he didn't get it. And I did actually have somebody in our office, I confirmed that all the houses along Rock Chuck were included on that list, and that I confirmed that prior to the speaking tonight. And like I say, that list was supplied by the city of Reno that we use for our noticing lists. So we did have other property owners along Rock Chuck that showed up, so I can't explain why they didn't get it, but I guarantee it was sent.
What's the chance of putting some asphalt down to widen that road up, since it's kind of narrow in the first place?
When we come in with our tentative map, we're going to have a traffic analysis, and we'll be looking at what improvements are necessary for that. But I think we're getting the cart ahead of the horse at this point. Once we come in with our tentative map, we'll address all the traffic concerns in detail with the traffic analysis.
And the remainder of the open space can be deed restricted?
Absolutely. Well, it essentially becomes deed restricted with the zoning. There's no development potential allowed for that.
I know, but there wasn't anything since
But
2004
yeah, I mean,
here.
with a tentative map, we could parcel that off and certainly include a deed restriction.
You see where I'm going? If
Yeah.
it was at 2004 and we were having this meeting, it'd be totally different because it wouldn't be commercial, it wouldn't be neighborhood, it would be parks, recreation
Right.
stuff, and open space. So,
But
now
yeah,
we're
that
talking
can
about-
definitely be deed restricted with a tentative map.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Mr. Bryce, you just said Commissioner Marshall hit me first?
Go ahead.
So-
Go ahead.
Okay.
Christiana, please. Christiana, we're losing 4+ acres of open space.
That's correct.
What's the rationale for that?
Yeah, so in terms of the rationale, it really is taking a look at the natural features on the land and seeing which of them are considered sensitive. That's something that, as Mike mentioned, we worked with him on throughout this process, really trying to say, okay, what are those features? It really is this, for this site, steep slopes. So we worked to kind of carve out those portions of the site between 15 and 25%, leaving them in the Park Greenway and Open Space Master Plan land use category and open space zoning category. There were no other sensitive natural features really to protect on this particular site. No rock outcroppings, no major drainage ways, nothing like that that would have warranted further open space designation. And so that's why we made the recommendation that maintaining kind of that western portion of the site was appropriate at this particular time.
The evaluation criteria 2 states that the proposed amendment is required based on change conditions or further studies. So I understand the land use designation correction because we did the overlay over the existing zoned residential. But what has changed since we adopted the master plan, which wasn't too long ago, that would justify a reduction in open space under these 2 criteria that we're supposed to look at, change conditions or further studies?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of change conditions for you to consider. Certainly, as outlined in the staff report, we continue to see increased pressures in terms of population growth. We are looking to accommodate that population growth and certainly to accommodate it in settings where the city can easily extend infrastructure and services. This particular site is an infill location, so that is helpful from that overall service provision perspective. And then also in terms of changed conditions, I think Mike did a good job outlining the fact that when the zoning designations were applied through kind of the translation process that occurs upon annexation, that was certainly some time ago. That was 2004 when the property was annexed. And in terms of how zoning designations were applied in the county, we do have more detailed slope information certainly available to us today. And so that's another aspect of changed information that you can consider tonight.
So that's, but we adopted the master plan in, when was that? Months ago? So isn't that really what we should be looking at in terms of change conditions, is from that point of time? Or what you're saying is really the adoption at that time wasn't really justified, and so we should look back further and take into account how the property came in. And I'm worried, at base I'm worried because the master plan also included lots of statements regarding limited open space and preservation of open space. And here we have a request to shift from open space to development. So I worry that that's inconsistent with kind of a prime directive of the master plan, or am I?
Yeah, so our updated master plan definitely looks to protect sensitive natural features, making those available to the public as appropriate for recreational types of amenities, looking to establish kind of those more connected networks of open space and greenways. Preserving the portion of this site that does have those sensitive natural features is, given that it is adjacent to an existing area of open space, it does help to provide kind of that connectivity to those other areas. But I think it is important to note the master plan doesn't say preserve all open space areas. It really gives some direction in terms of the types of features that we should be preserving, and then connectivity. So I think that's one point to consider. And then thinking about the fact that staff did make an error in terms of the application of the master plan land use. If we had and as Mike stated, was absolutely an oversight. We were applying land use designations to over 85,000 parcels. So we should have taken the zoning that was on place in the parcel, split it. And so you really would have had a straight carry forward from what was in place from 2004, from the master plan side of things and the zoning side of things. Right now you see that on the zoning designations that are in place on the site. So we really didn't look to, through the master plan process, except in a few specific areas, go forth and say, we have all of these designations exactly right on every piece of property in the city of Reno. So we do have a master plan that provides us policy guidance as we look to consider master plan amendments. And so we're providing a recommendation that takes into account those policies that give us that guidance in terms of considering changes.
So in essence, the low value of whatever the non-steep sections of the lot that were designated open space, they're not worthy enough to justify preserving them because we need additional housing, and we should be changing the zoning and the land use designations to residential.
The site characteristics do make the eastern portion of the site more suitable for development. And in terms of weighing the policy considerations in the master plan, we are looking to provide housing options. In infill development locations, we're also looking to preserve open space where it makes sense and provide connections for our community to those different types of open space areas so that we have that connectivity, walkability, and amenity. So you need to consider all of those goals in relation to this request and see if you can balance those goals and render a decision on the amendments.
And last question, this situation is different from the one we were addressing on McCarran, North McCarran, or McCarran and what's the area?
I believe
Sorry.
that you're referencing kind of the northeast quadrant of McCarran and I-80, and so that's really the
So that-
the Canyon master plan amendment.
Yeah, that was that open space arrived as a trade-off for development of the flatter portions of the canyon, and there's nothing like this, that kind of trade-off that occurred here on the prior history of this parcel, that it was dated, or it was designated open space as a result of development of other portions of an ownership.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, there are no similarities in terms of any types of trade-offs. This is really, for this particular site, zoning that has been carried forward and that has been in place since about 2004 and is looking to be changed. And I believe the McCarran site also had a variety of other significant constraints, such as drainage ways present.
Thank you.
Commissioner Weisky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sienna, if you will, for the benefit of the neighbors that are here, the next series of questions is more for an explanation of process that's taking place. Tonight before us is a master plan amendment which does what to the existing properties?
The proposed master plan amendment would change the eastern portion of the site to allow for primarily detached single-family uses.
Okay, so it will allow for future development of those. This is not what we would call a map, a tentative or a final map, which is a designed project on its way to being a permitted project, correct?
That is absolutely correct. This is the master plan amendment and zone change process is the first step, really in terms of changing the type and location of development on particular lands. As we look forward, we do have projects that will be coming forward. We know that the tentative map has been talked about tonight. That would also require a public process and any other special use permits that might be needed on this particular site. So we know that discretionary review is still ahead. That will be noticed very similarly to the master plan and zone change before you today. And I did want to note, in addition to noticing for the required neighborhood meeting that was held on May 30th, we also noticed for the master plan and zone change in terms of notice by mail within 750 feet, notice by site
Okay.
posting. So there's actually been two.
Well, I'm talking
mailed
more about the
notices for
construction
this
aspect
evening.
of it, not the noticing part of it, okay? So after tonight, if this is accepted as proposed, then a tentative map comes forward. That's an actual design, and at that time is when Planning Commission will get to see the project again, get more public input, and look at existing road conditions, existing infrastructure, sewer, water, gas, electric, and at that time put input in, condition it so that certain things happen, accessibility, traffic is looked at, all those things at that time, correct?
Absolutely. That is the time through the tentative map process that we look at subdivision design, all public improvements that are necessary to accommodate the development. Certainly, we will be looking at the roadway and its state. We will be looking per code to require sidewalks. So all of those improvements would be identified on that tentative
Okay,
map.
and at that time, yellow cards, noticing cards will be mailed out again for that process?
That's correct.
And also the 4x4 yellow signs, 4 foot by 4 foot, will be placed on the property noticing the neighborhood, right?
Yes, there will be large site postings as well.
Okay, so that's still coming forward.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chairman, no further questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Hawkins.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Anna, we've seen over the years how we've got developments at 200, 300, 400 houses, and they never trigger any of the RTC fundamentals for infrastructure. And I've seen Golden Valley, because I live out there in the area, I've seen Golden Valley creep up and over the hill when they said they wouldn't come within a rock's throw of people in Panther Valley. And they're on their back porch right now. And nothing's been triggered to widen that road. Is there a way we can get an engineering, the meter they put out there with those rubber hoses and do a count? And let's find out what's really going on the road before they decide to build?
I would defer the process to do actual traffic counts to Janelle Thomas, our senior civil engineer, but do want to note, at least on the roadway side of things, that local roads are required to be constructed by the development. When it comes forward, we take a close look at what types of improvements need to be on those local roads. We also take a close look at the state of our regional roads, and I think there was earlier discussion this evening about the regional road impact fee. That is the established system to provide for fees that go in to improve those regional roads, commensurate with the impact to new development. So I'll hand it over for more details on the counts.
Janelle Thomas, Senior Civil Engineer for the record. So when the tentative map application comes in for review and analysis, part of that application is a traffic study that would come with that development. And those analyses would be provided at that time.
And from that, we can derive a picture of what the road's going to look like afterwards.
Correct, and they would need to make sure that they meet the Public Works design standards for local roadways, and that would include the width, the pavement section, curb gutter, sidewalk, that whole component. Because it does appear from the pictures that were shown earlier that that was constructed as a half-street improvement, and that may have resulted from, previously being in the county. I know that they do or did in the past allow half-street improvements. The city of Reno does not allow that to occur with current development.
And it's possible that we can attach conditions onto a tentative map when we see that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a standard of our practice.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
I would like to make one comment. We've got a brand-new master plan that we're supposed to be living up to, and someone told me the other day, we're supposed to be planning for the city and not planning by amendment. I just wanted to throw that out for everybody to chew on. Thank you.
Mike, I have a question for you. So one of the master plan amendment, I think, has been discussed pretty well here. I guess the question I have is looking more at the zoning change and the increase from essentially the SF-15 to the SF-6 that you're looking for.
Right.
I understand that there's some other development there that has that size lot, but we also indicated that was kind of done through cluster development to allow that to happen. I guess I have some concerns about turning an entire area, and granted, it's not a large parcel, but the cluster development aspect of it worked because there was some open space and more meandering roads and things like that. Now we're looking at an area that's essentially at the end of a one-way, right now, a street, that if we allow for the additional zoning, it seems to me that, that could be, we could be getting the density that we want, but basically at the tail end of a development instead of the front end of the development.
Sure, and we considered that when we looked at our zoning, and what I would make the argument that we're essentially doing the clustering like those other subdivisions did, but we're doing it through straight zoning rather than through clustering through a special use permit with a tentative map. So we're essentially keeping basically doing what they did, taking the steeper slopes and leaving those as open space, and then keeping the density down. So when we looked at that, we said, well, what would be compatible from a straight zoning approach to kind of match what the adjoining subdivisions did, and that's where we got the SF6 zoning. And I think if you look at the infill location, the availability of infrastructure, and the need for some more affordable single-family homes, this really makes sense to go SF6.
And I understand the intent there, but I'm also looking at it, as Commissioner Weisky pointed out, that there's not a project in front of us.
Right.
So going with this zone change, we basically create a situation where you're forced into not only that, you know, the SF6, but it just gives, you know, short of looking at a specific project, there's a level of density that could occur by this upsizing that, again, I'm not looking at a map,
Sure.
so I don't have a project, that I have some concerns in terms of where this is at with respect to the rest of the neighborhood, in terms of making that change. So I guess using the discussion that you're talking about, what's the issue with keeping it still at an SF15, but designing it in the cluster method that you're speaking to?
I think, and as soon as put up, it's kind of like I mentioned earlier, a mishmash of zoning now. And I think to really, if you look at the goals of the master plan, for example, of providing some more intensity in infill areas, stuff, I think it makes more sense as SF6, especially if you want to consider the affordability factor, which I know we can't really do that tonight. But if you look at, sorry, I was trying to do the mouse. I just realized it's on the overhead. You know, if you look at some of these lots down here, like along Chisholm stuff, it'll essentially just look like a functional extension of the existing neighborhood under the SF6 zoning. A lot of those lots that are in there now, even though it's zoned SF9, are non-conforming with the SF9 standards. Like I said, the lots to the north, and by providing that open space, I think you get the same at the end of the day even if you built to the highest and most intense ability you could under SF6, I think functionally it will look just like the rest of the existing neighborhood, and will kind of be seamlessly, you know, when it's all said and done, you won't really notice any difference in lot sizes at all. It'll look like an extension of the existing neighborhood.
Okay. Sienna, just as a follow-up to that, and I understand what Mike's saying. I guess I'm just, you know, staff's obviously looked at this from an SF9 standpoint. I guess the reason for my question is that it is a little bit circuitous to get back to that location. You basically have to go through the neighborhood to get there. And I'm just a little concerned about the density that could be created here. Obviously, staff has looked at that. Are we in keeping with, I've read what you're saying, but are we truly in keeping with what's happening with the neighborhood there in terms of the development that staff sees as potential for this site?
Staff felt that the proposed zoning of SF6 was compatible, noting that we do have kind of a mix of different zoning designations. We have, in terms of directly to the south of the site, we have SF9. This is an SF6 zone. We have other SF6 zones here, even though the lots are quite larger. And then noting the fact that the subdivision to the north did develop under clustered standards, and does have kind of a wide variety of kind of some of the larger lots, but then also smaller lots that are definitely 6,000 square feet. So we were definitely comfortable with overall compatibility of the surrounding area, while noting that we are looking to provide for housing in infill opportunity areas, which this qualifies as.
Okay. Thank you. Additional questions? Commissioner Olivas.
Yeah, Commissioner Olivas. I guess a few thoughts, and I'll get to my question because they roll into that, but Keystone Canyon, I think that's a bit different, and when I look at this, I still look back to that, and my first answer is no. But at least there it was openly stated that the economics would now work, but that wasn't a reason to do it. But here we've got conflicting issues within the master plan versus open space and housing. And I guess kind of my thoughts are on population growth and site characteristics as being a justification. Then when are we developing Rancho San Rafael? That would be a great subdivision. That's kind of my feeling going into this, that this was an absolute no to trade off open space for development for somebody to make money. But in the report, it says staff acknowledges the application of the PGOS designation to the entire site was in error. So I guess, can you help me understand the error? And if it was an error, did the city waive the applicant's fees to acknowledge that it was an error and that we're correcting the error?
So as I explained earlier, the site, as you can see on kind of the left-hand side, in terms of existing zoning, has about half the site zoned open space and the other half is zoned SF15. So what was missed in the application of the master plan land use designation process was actually splitting that in terms of the data and applying single-family neighborhood to the eastern portion of the site. So in terms of acknowledging that error, staff definitely does acknowledge that error. We should have split it. In terms of waiving the master plan and zone change fees, we did not do that in this particular location because ultimately what was desired was a master plan amendment to extend single-family neighborhood towards the western portion of the site. So there would have been a master plan amendment that would have been necessary regardless of whether the new designations had been applied correctly.
So the error was not for the full
That's
ask
correct.
here today. The error was only for part of the ask.
That's correct.
And now we're asking for more conversion of open space than the error actually was.
That's correct.
Okay.
Additional questions, discussion, comments? Commissioner Hawkins.
Thanks, Chair. One question for Sienna. Is that a private water company that purveys the water out there? Because Panther Valley has a private water company.
At this point in time, I'm not exactly sure who would be charged with serving this particular property. I believe it's Tumwa. I would let, and that has been confirmed by Mike Rayleigh.
Okay, thank you.
There used to be a private water company, but it was taken over by Tumwa about 2 years ago.
Thank you.
Okay. The affordable housing component that we've been talking about for 2 years that I've been here, where do we see affordable housing in this small little development?
Can you give me a better sense if you're talking about just generally a diversity of housing that provides various price points, or are you talking about
Various
income
price points.
restricted?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this would provide for primarily a detached single-family product on 6,000 square foot lots. In terms of their pricing in the marketplace, I'm not exactly sure where they would be within that, but they are providing a housing product that we do need within the city of Reno in an infill development location. If there is additional information about the actual pricing of the homes and what's anticipated, I would defer to the applicant's representative there. But we do not require that all master plan amendments and zone changes provide for affordable housing. It's really about having a mix of housing across the city, and certainly larger projects, maybe a little bit larger than this small site, have a greater opportunity to have a larger mix of different types of housing products.
Thank you.
Additional discussion. Commissioner Griffith.
Just for discussion topics, I wanted to note that I'm sensitive to the infill possibility of this project, and also that we do have a growing population, but I myself cannot justify taking open space and rezoning it at this time. So that's just where I'm at. And I appreciate the questions that you guys asked, but I was just chiming in for discussion.
Thank you. Commissioner Hawkins.
I feel the same way. All the commissioners here know how I feel about open space and conversion thereof. So I've got to go on the coattails of my fellow commissioner here and say I wouldn't be voting for this. At least it'd be a no vote.
Any additional discussion? Commissioner Olivas.
I guess I just got my question answered. If the ask was the same as the error, I'd be all on board with it, but the ask is more than the error, and I can't go along with taking additional open space just because it's convenient and because population growth or site characteristics and to develop it. I really, if the ask was the same as the error, I think the city should actually absorb the fees, but if it's not, then I can't go along with it.
Okay, Commissioner Marshall.
This to me is, I really like this issue that we have in front of us. It's a straight up planning issue of what, where our values are in terms of open space, infill development. And it, quite honestly, I'm not positive about exactly what are the best mix here of utilizing this area of the city for what purpose should it be used for? Open space or housing, potential housing. While SF6 is the most intense single-family zone that we have, and there's probably more issues related to traffic, et cetera, if we went, if we assigned an multifamily designation to it. I'm not certain that I see a lot of value in the open space compared to, what's the trade-off between the value of the open space versus the value of the housing that we could get here, and particularly that it's relatively close in. Starting off, I thought I would be a zealous advocate for preserving the open space. But I voted no so many times tonight that I'm really kind of tired of it. Just, getting everything out on the record. So I don't know. I think you have all identified the right things to talk about and to measure, but, really is one that what we think as planning commissioners should be the best use of this site. I am swayed a bit by the fact that open space came as a result of not as a barter for a larger development, assuming that's truthful. But on the other hand, to the extent that we have designated open space, I think we should have a really good reason to deviate from that. And I don't know where this hits, to be honest. Are we close? Because quite honestly, every open space could have the same justification, because we're always going to need more housing. So that's kind of just some thoughts, random thoughts. Thanks.
Commissioners, just for a moment, I will beg your pardon for just a second. There was a question that came up regarding existing versus proposed that Sienna weighed in on. I would like the applicant to come forward and just note the question, and we just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. The request was for more than what was originally zoned, correct?
Correct. And thank you, Commissioner Johnson. As I mentioned earlier, if you look at how this became open space in the first place, we talk about 2004. It's actually the zoning was put in place by the county, 30 years ago. And when that open space zoning was applied, it was kind of done, well, we're looking out there, and somebody would go out in the field and look at parcels with no parcel lines or whatnot, and they were and that's why the county kind of refined those zoning boundaries on a case-by-case basis with projects. So unfortunately, this parcel sat vacant, and when it got annexed in, it had there was no scientific data other than just let's look at it with the naked eye to determine what classified as open space. And as Commissioner Marshall pointed out, it talked about more detailed studies. Well, we've done a detailed slope analysis. We know that 90% of the site is 15% or less slope. It's not constrained. If that data would have been available when the county originally zoned it, it would have never been zoned open space in the first place. And I think that's an important consideration. The other thing is, if you look at what the intent of open space zoning is to protect natural features. It's to provide for recreational opportunities. That doesn't exist on this site. This site is on private property. It's landlocked. It doesn't connect to a trail system. Any bit of steep slopes that you would see, we're still essentially preserving as open space with this request. So I think that's an important consideration, that those studies weren't available when this was zoned, and had they been, I think the county would have just extended their MDS zoning over to what you see here. And that was done on a case-by-case basis. Back when I still had hair, when I was out of school doing tentative maps of the county, I remember refining zoning boundaries with tentative maps in the county, and that's how it would have been handled. But
Mike,
unfortunately,
that's all fundamentally speculative, isn't it? I mean, you're just giving us.
I
your
can
thoughts
tell you
as to
when
what
it
might
was
have
when
happened.
it was zoned, I can tell you that they did not have electronic topographic data of that site.
Well, but yes,
Okay.
but most original zoning prior to whatever date that was did. Sorry.
Right. So.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Thank you. Commissioner Weisky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll chime in. I don't have a problem with the open space on this one, and yet I think there's 7 of us usually up here that have a common theme when it comes to open space, and it's very important to us, and we're not willing to give it up. In this case, and hearing different applications come before the Planning Commission over my terms, in this little bowl, as I refer to it, the open space that's being proposed, I think, is appropriate. The development that is being proposed, I consider to be appropriate. I honestly would like to see it left as 15, though. I think that it works for this area, although people may not use it the same as it's used when you go into Lemon Valley or Golden Valley or farther north, the larger lots, but it's a matter of traffic in this little bowl, and SF6 is going to add quite a bit of traffic to it. And so I have more of a problem with that, even though it's matching zoning. We're just matching zoning and adding traffic onto it. It may cut the number of lots, it should cut the number of lots in half or close to it, and that would be less traffic for those who need to get out of that bowl, along with the commercial traffic that exists with inside that railroad ring road already today. And that's not even built out and being used to its fullest potential. But I do remember a few years ago, and Commissioner Olivas probably remembers it, that we did have some developers at the time or property owners inside that ring road who proposed different options for development inside that railroad. And that's going to add more traffic even if it stays commercial, industrial. So I'm kind of sitting and listening to what my fellow commissioners are saying and their comments regarding this. And that's why I waited till last to go, or near last. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman doesn't have anything to add, other than I just want to clarify for the commission, on page 14, we actually have separate motions for both the master plan amendment and the zoning plan amendment. And clarification from legal, in the case of the master plan amendment going first and not being approved, do we still need a motion on the zoning map amendment? Just as a point of clarification. Love it, I caught them off guard. They didn't have a pat answer for me.
No, I don't, this is Carl Hall for the record. No, if you don't pass the master plan amendment, then you don't need to change the zoning.
Okay.
And the master plan amendment requires 5 votes.
Excellent, thank you. So that was the clarification I need. Commissioner Hawkins, additional
Just
discussion?
have one thing. On my page 14, it indicates that we're looking at Mountain View mixed residential. I think we did that a couple weeks ago. I don't have a proposed motion in my package.
That is true. The way the motion is written should be changed. The case number is incorrect. Is that, Sienna, are we reading that correctly?
That is correct. That is a typographical error in the staff report, and the case number should be LDC 18-00079, and the case referenced Coyote Crossing, and that is still master plan and zoning map amendments, all under that one case.
Thank you. So whoever chooses to make the motion, please note the correct 18-00079 project. Commissioners, anybody want to go first?
I'll do it.
Commissioner Hawkins.
In the case number LDC 18-00079, Coyote Crossing Master Plan and Zoning Plan Amendment, we're just doing the master plan at this point. I'd vote to deny the master plan change on Coyote Crossing.
Read the rest of the
On
thing as
my
well. Yeah.
By resolution, recommend the city council approve the master plan amendment, deny the master plan amendment by resolution, and that's it, I guess, or do I skip over the zoning map? And I can make all the findings. I'm sorry, I cannot make all the findings, yeah, get me confused there.
Commissioner Griffith.
Commissioner Griffith, I second for denial, and I am unable to make the following master plan evaluation criteria B.
Okay, I have a motion and a second for denial. Any discussion? All those in favor of the denial?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Aye. Nay. You didn't vote. Commissioner Marshall.
I'm sorry, can you count me as a affirmative vote on the motion to deny?
Okay, so motion to deny, I have Commissioner Olivas, Commissioner Marshall, Commissioner Griffith, and Commissioner Hawkins in favor of the denial. Commissioner Weisky and Commissioner Johnson voted nay on that motion. So based on that, motion passes, and we do not have to move on to the zoning map. And I read the appeal leave it on this. Goes automatically to the, it's a recommendation to council for the denial. So then it will be moved up to council for discussion based on our recommendation. So, okay. Take a slight pause for a second here while we do a little shifting up here on thing before we move on to the next item.
One of them is dated after the meeting.
Mr. Chairman, can we take a break first?
We're going to take a 2-minute recess. my microphone on. Sorry about that. Item 6.7, case number LDC 18-00088, Panther Meadows zoning map amendment. Mike,
I'm back.
it's been so long.
Once again, for the record, Mike Rayla with Rubicon Design Group. I'm thinking this one's going to be much simpler, at least in explaining it. So if I can get, yeah, there we go. The project site is located on the north side of Panther Drive in Panther Valley. This is 395 Panther Drive coming up here. This is Western Road, which would go into the industrial area that was shown on the previous project. What we're requesting is a zoning map amendment to rezone the 4.41 acre site from neighborhood commercial to community commercial, and no change in master plan. So it's just a zone change. It's a fairly simple change. The reason that we're requesting it is that neighborhood commercial requires that if any residential use is put in here, that it has to have a first floor commercial component, which we don't really feel makes sense in this area given kind of the surrounding uses. This project was submitted previously for a tentative map and special use permit to develop some townhomes along with some support commercial services. It's after, at staff's review, it was determined that the zone change would be necessary in order to eliminate the first floor commercial component on those townhomes. The project will still have a commercial component, but this change does not represent an increase in density that would be allowed on the site over what the neighborhood commercial would be in terms of allowed units. It does add a few additional uses that would be permitted under CC zoning. However, no matter what, this project triggers residential adjacency special use permit. So regardless of what's there, it will come back with a special use permit. So it's a fairly simple request, but I'm happy to address any questions you might have.
Thanks, Mike. Jeff.
Good evening again. Jeff Borkhardt, Associate Planner for the record. I won't go into much more detail other than prior master plan land use designation was mixed residential. That was consistent with the neighborhood commercial. Now it's suburban mixed use, so you can go all the way up to arterial commercial in this area. And so the community commercial is sort of a middle ground in terms of commercial zoning designations compared to the neighborhood commercial. And as Mr. Reilly mentioned about the ground floor retail, they have submitted a tentative map special use permit application at this point. And one of the comments was you have to do ground floor retail on every single, or sorry, ground floor commercial, not necessarily retail, on every single residential unit, and that's not something that they wanted to do, nor would it be great for the overall project. So they wanted to change it to community commercial. As Mike mentioned, there's only several uses that would be different between the two uses. You just get a you get some different design standards and some additional height, which is also protected through the height to setback ratio standards that are in the residential adjacency section with our code. So with that, I'm also available for any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. I have one public comment form I will read in a moment. We'll come back to disclosures. Start with Commissioner Olivas.
Commissioner Olivas, I visited the site.
Commissioner Marshall, no disclosures.
Commissioner Johnson, no disclosures.
Commissioner Griffith, no disclosures.
Commissioner Hawkins visited the site.
Commissioner Weisky, I spoke with the applicant's representative, and I'm familiar with the site.
Want me to start that all over again? I have one public comment form. Rich Anderson does not wish to make a statement, is in favor, and his comments, I'm going to talk to Janelle on this one. Can you repair the Panther Drive portion that feels like you're driving on a cheese grater under the bridge? So I'm going to pass that on to our engineering staff. Are there any additional public comments on this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to the commission for questions, comments, all of the above. Commissioner Hawkins.
This is for our planning manager, Sienna. Are there any implications on changing or building homes right next to a warehouse, later on in life, will we have a zoning problem or any type of adjacency problem because we're doing this?
For the record, Sienna Reed, so the existing non-residential uses are already in place. So they're not necessarily going to need to come in for a special use permit to establish adjacent to residential. If the applicant does pursue residential on this particular site, that's one of many allowed uses. We don't know exactly if that's what they're going to do, but they would be able to work with their site design in a way to minimize any potential conflicts with the existing non-residential uses to the east of the site. And I may let Jeff weigh in a little bit more if he has additional details.
And Commissioner Hawkins, it's also important to note that right now the zoning designation already allows residential on this site. And so by changing to community commercial, the only difference is that the residential that's allowed in the neighborhood commercial requires a ground floor commercial component. And as part of the community commercial, it would no longer require the ground floor commercial component. That is the differentiating factor between the two.
Okay.
And so what we normally do is take a look comprehensively at any project and make sure that there's adequate buffering between existing land uses, which is seen through the special use permit findings. So when that project comes before the commission, we'll look at whether or how compatibility is addressed.
Thanks.
Commissioner Weisky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since you asked for comments, I would just like to compliment staff. I know it takes an extra couple of branches off of a tree, but Exhibit 6.7C, including the highlights of what we are existing to what we are changing to, is a wonderful addition to the staff reports. It certainly made it easy as I went through and started to cross-reference what was allowed, permitted, existing, versus what would be allowed with an SUP or the change. This format is awesome, and I would like to see you guys do it more often. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weisky. Commissioner Levis? Sorry, you had your finger on the button.
My finger on the button, so I guess I got to say something.
That'll teach you.
I guess just my comments on this, with the first floor retail being the part of going away, and I think the other big issue not big issue, but kind of concern I had was height, and I think that the height's controlled by the setbacks, and both of everything and all the other uses are residential adjacency, so I think this makes sense.
Commissioner Johnson, I'll weigh in. The height was the other one that I flagged going through, but I think as was pointed out by both the applicant and staff, anything that comes forward on this site will have to have us look at that, and there's a lot of conditions in place to make sure that that's addressed. So with that, I would look for a motion. Commissioner Levis.
Touch that button again.
You did.
In case number LDC 18-00088, Panther Meadows zoning map amendment. Based on compliance with applicable findings, I move to recommend that City Council approve the zoning map amendment by ordinance. And I can make all the findings.
Thank you. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Commissioner Griffith, I'll second, and I can make all the findings.
Excellent. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. That hasn't happened tonight. Sorry. No. I think we were all guilty at some point. Okay, moving on. Item number 7, Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Liaison Report. Commissioner Hawkins.
We met, and it was Wednesday? Was a 2 to 4 or 6 to 8 o'clock meeting over there at RTC's building regarding affordable housing, and it happened to be, most people were there. Well, Commissioner Weisky.
The Commissioner Weisky wasn't looking at you when you waved at him?
No. And we talked about affordable housing and several other areas of concern in Washoe County. So Our next meeting, I believe, is coming at the middle of July. And that's it.
Mr. Chairman, can I add to that? Because I would like to thank staff, Reno staff. There was a comment made at the beginning of the meeting that last meeting would be my final meeting as a regional planning commissioner, and that was erroneous. I actually have 1 year left on my term, and I would like to thank our Reno staff for staying up late and sending me a text late last Wednesday night saying that it was wrong, and I still have 1 year left. So, and I reported that to our director, and so I'm
Not
happy
dead
to
yet.
say I'm still on regional for another 12 months.
Excellent. Okay. Good. That was probably the longest regional planning liaison report we've had. Appreciate that. Nice. All right, item 8, staff announcements. Sienna.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Just a few updates on items that the Planning Commission has previously taken action on. You'll remember the Big Rock Sports Hazardous Materials Special Use Permit. That's actually going to be heard again by the City Council, who's continued to allow for some additional work with the neighborhood, hold an additional neighborhood meeting. The Fuse 44 zone change from MF30 to community commercial was approved by City Council, and then also the progress zone change from mixed use North Virginia Street Transit Corridor to industrial was also approved, as well as the Mountain View Master Plan Amendment and zone change on West 4th that you saw previously. And in terms of the Pennington Estates tentative map, that item has been continued. We believe not exactly sure which July meeting it's coming forward to on City Council, so I'll hold my tongue on saying that date. But the goal there is to have additional time for the applicant to work with the surrounding neighbors. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Item 9, Commissioner's suggestions for future agenda items. Commissioner Weisky.
Can we get an update at our next meeting for the requests that the Planning Commission has made in the last 6 months for future agenda items that aren't being agendized? So that we have a schedule, please?
Okay. Item 10, public comment. For public comment on any action item or for any general public comment. Michelle, do I have any requests to speak forms?
No.
Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to the commission for item 11, adjournment.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Good night.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.